So I'm back out here in Springfield, Ohio, and I'm starting to think there's something in the water here. I got a call from a guy who bought a dream Victorian mansion. Wanted to fix it up, but now he's convinced the house is trying to kill both him and his wife.
We need some light at the end of the tunnel.
He sounded like a mess on the phone, and I'm really hoping we can help him out.
So, Rodney, when we spoke on the phone, you didn't sound too great. What's going on?
It's bad to be scared in your own home. It's hard to say, but I just really don't feel I can go on.
All right, I understand what you're saying. Is it something in the house that's making you feel that way?
I really, truly believe it is.
Okay. How long have you guys been here?
We've been here about 15 months. We bought this house as a dream home of ours, and we're hoping to be able to stay.
Okay, so now who lives in the house?
My wife and I.
You mentioned on the phone to me that you thought whatever's here is breaking up your marriage or destroying it. Why is it the paranormal, not just life crap?
We just feel that whatever's here is influencing us to be just mean to each other. We just don't get along like we used to.
So you feel your personality's changed?
Yes.
In what way?
I'm just really short-tempered.
You don't strike me as that type of guy.
You know, I usually try not to be.
All right, now what about your wife? Is she having any changes?
She is the best lady, but here lately she's just real short-tempered also.
So it sounds like this marriage is on the rocks.
Yes,
I mean, do you want to save your marriage?
most definitely.
Okay.
I love my wife.
You afraid of losing her?
Yeah, yes I am.
So Rodney, do me a favor and give me a list of what you and your wife are dealing with here.
We constantly hear banging, footsteps. The hallway always sounds like there's voices, people. There's some kind of dark entity following me around all the time. And I also suffer from a lot of health problems. I've got diabetes, heart problems, liver.
It sounds like you might have had them before, but when you came here, did they increase?
I had some, but I've also gotten a lot more since I've been here.
What about your wife as far as health issues go? Any problems?
Yeah, she's been suffering from cancer.
Met this really old lady. She's wearing all black. I'm disturbed by her. I get fearful with her. She doesn't have any eyes because, you know, it's like she's decayed. You know, she's decomposed. Skin on bones. I don't like her. So the dead lady, so she is around in this area. She's telling me about somebody dying. Like, I'm seeing her being very aggressive now. She can easily harm people if they're weak, meaning if they're like ill already or susceptible to illnesses. She is claiming that she has killed a handful of people here.
Wow, you guys got a lot of work going on.
Yeah, we do.
All right, so what's going on?
Up here, I hear footsteps.
You hear it when you're downstairs or you hear it when you're up here?
Actually, when I did lay in my bed, I heard the footsteps up over top of me.
And we're above your bed now.
Yes,
So what did you hear? Did it sound like a man walking, kids? What did it sound like to you?
like one person walking.
Okay.
I didn't hear it sound like multiples.
Okay. Did it sound like an adult?
I would say yes, because it was pretty loud, the footsteps, more than I would think a child, maybe not as loud.
You know, Rodney, it's an old house. How do you know that these footsteps are part of house creaking and everything?
Well, to me, Steve, it sounds like it paces.
Okay.
So it goes from one area to another.
Okay, so have you heard anything else besides footsteps?
I've heard a woman's voice.
Young, old?
It sounds like an older lady. I've heard her say full sentences, but I can't understand what she's saying.
Now, where did you hear the voice?
Right here in this room.
That must have freaked you out a little bit.
Yes, it did.
Anything else?
Yeah, I always feel like I'm not welcome up here.
What is the feeling for you?
You just feel like there's always somebody watching you and they don't want you in their space.
Do you think it just wants you to get the hell out?
No, I really think it wants to hurt me, Steve.
Okay.
This dead old lady is bragging. Says she's killed a few people. And she's claiming to have killed them to have them do her bidding. Like she's using them to attack the living.
Do you know why she's doing this?
She doesn't want any living people here?
I'm assuming this is where you sleep with Carolyn, right?
No, I don't sleep here anymore.
You don't? Where do you sleep?
I sleep in a recliner in the living room.
Yeah, that can't be good for the marriage either, not for nothing.
No, it's not.
All right, so what's going on?
I see shadow figures. To me, it looked like it was 7 feet tall. And I really think that's the entity that I think is after me.
All right, so what else?
When I sleep in my chair in my living room, I always feel that there's something that comes in and sits with me.
So do you ever see like the depression in the couch or anything like
yes.
that? But do you think it's the same as that? It's the same thing as that 7-foot shadow figure?
Yeah, I really think it is, Steve.
Okay. Anything else?
I always feel like I'm being stalked in my own home. And I just feel like there's something always there, always watching me.
All right, do you feel that way right this second?
Right now, I'm starting to feel a little bit.
What are you hoping we can do?
I'm really hoping that you and Amy can get us help and then hopefully me and my wife get our relationship back.
I'm feeling a living male in this room who is also experiencing some kind of attack. It's like out of the blue, coming from the back, being startled, caught off guard. But, it feels like somebody getting jumped. Like, so now I'm like, is it her? Like, is she doing this shit? Because she does not like men. It is dangerous for the living to be here. I wouldn't, suggest a living person be here.
So, Russ, I understand that you're friends of the family here, Rodney and Carolyn.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And how long you know Rodney?
I've known Rodney and worked with Rodney for about 20 years.
Okay, so you know the guy well.
Yes.
He obviously told you about the stuff that's going on here?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Have you had experiences?
I was standing at the bottom of the steps here and I saw an older lady up at the top of the steps, on about the 3rd step down. She was white. She had hair down to about her shoulders, not from this time period.
Okay.
As we turned and went up, I seen her. She made eye contact with me. I looked away, and she said that she did not care for Rodney, that men were degrading her house, like her property.
Okay. So how old do you think she was?
60s, and seemed very, I don't want to say uppity, not lacking of money.
So she came from wealth.
Yes, yes.
All right, so anything else?
Yeah, while I was upstairs here in the attic, I got scratched on my right arm. Here's some pictures of it.
Oh, you're up in the attic. I mean, you sure you didn't scratch this on something? Any nails popping out or anything like that?
No.
Did you feel it when it happened, or you?
No, I did not. Didn't feel a thing.
You think the old lady had anything to do with this?
No, I did not feel like she had anything to do with that at all.
All right, do you think they're in danger, these people?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, I do too, the way it sounds.
Mm-hmm.
I'm more concerned about them. So do you think Rodney and Carolyn should just pack up and leave and cut their losses, or do you think they should try to figure out what the hell's going on here?
I wouldn't stay. I've been here 3 times in 3 years. But that's me.
Okay. So, Ashley, I understand you're Rodney's daughter.
Yes.
Okay. But you don't live here.
No, I do not.
And how often do you come visit?
Not as often as I'd like. To be honest with you, the house creeps me out.
I mean, even this room is creepy. What's with the dolls?
Yeah. Trust me, I agree with you.
So your father told me he thinks that whatever's here is trying to kill him, as well as break up the marriage. You agree with that at all?
Yes, I think it's trying to drive him crazy, and I think it wants to isolate him by getting rid of Carolyn.
As far as experiences in the house, have you had any?
Yes. So there's a old lady ghost in the house, and at one point, she comforted my son in the middle of the night.
Okay. Explain what happened.
I was sleeping, and I had a portable crib at the foot of the bed, and I could hear shushing and patting on my son.
Okay.
And so in the morning, I woke up and I went to Carolyn. I said, Carolyn, thank you for coming in. And she said, I didn't go in there.
That's a scary thing, especially as a mom.
Right.
All right. Anything else?
I was awoken in the middle of the night, and the door opened to the bedroom. A old lady in a navy blue lace, kind of almost ruffly dress, but it was all lace. She walked through the door, and then she just slowly faded away.
That's giving me chills just hearing you talk about it. Do you have any idea what time period she might have been from?
I'd guess early 1900s.
Do you think this was the same woman that patted your son?
I do. I think so.
So do you think it would help if your father actually moved out of here?
I don't think so. What's been following him, it's not going anywhere. It's
Okay.
going wherever he's going.
Okay.
The old woman is taking white flower petals and she's sprinkling them across 6 gravestones. And she comes in and sits down with a dead baby that's all wrapped up in a sheet. She is bad and causes most of the issues with the living. She's definitely in here a lot. She's telling me that somebody fell down the stairs and cracked their head. She's causing this, like she's claiming to have harmed people. To me, it's like good luck sleeping here.
So Rodney mentioned to me that you guys aren't even sleeping together anymore. That can't be good for the marriage.
No, it's not. We're presently more like roommates
Than like a married couple.
than a married couple.
Okay. So Rodney's really concerned that the marriage is in danger. I mean, do you think it's that serious?
I think it's very serious, but I'm determined to fix it. I mean, we're in love, but we're just in crisis right now. We don't know what to do.
All right, so, talk to your husband. He seems to think that a lot of your health issues are due to whatever the hell's in this house.
I agree with that.
You do?
I do.
Are you having any other types of paranormal experiences?
Yes. I've been held down in bed. I couldn't move. I couldn't make a sound. I forced one of my eyes open, and I saw this monster-looking thing.
All right, so what did it look like?
It looked like a mummy. The head of it was covered in dirty bandages, and I could see one of its eyes, and it was really pissed off.
Are you sure you weren't dreaming?
No, I had just laid down.
All right, so health issues, being held down in bed. Anything else physical like that happen?
I've had my hair pulled.
Explain what happened.
Multiple times I'll roll over in bed and face the wall, and something will be tugging at my hair.
Was there any pets here?
No,
Nothing like that?
no pets.
I don't see anything you can get your hair caught on.
No.
This is a nightmare.
It is a nightmare, and I'm completely exhausted. I want happiness and security, and I'd like to have my husband back.
Yeah.
I have to be strong. I don't have a choice.
Well, why don't you let me be strong for a few days for you? How's that?
Okay,
Can we do that?
I'll try.
Okay.
There's a little girl over there, just like angry. I am seeing her kind of stomping around, you know, like, so definitely making noise. I'm kind of wondering if, like, you know, maybe the living are seeing, like, her being a ghost. Your stereotypical, you know, she's floating or floating down the hall. She's a strange one. And she is showing me pulling hair. I'm seeing her grasping somebody's hair and yanking it. The person's sleeping and she just yanks on their hair. I don't think that families would fare well here because I think that there would be a lot of jealousy with this kid. If there were like happy families, I don't think she would let that happen. I think she would cause things like miscommunication, feelings of animosity towards one another. Like, she's creepy. She's got like a creepy vibe about her.
So the first call I made when I got into town was to call my old friend, journalist Lou Hebert. Now, he did a little bit of digging for me and found something that's going to really help me out. Turns out a doctor who lived just down the street from Rodney's house snapped and poisoned his 4 kids. Lou says his motive was a simple one: depression and money.
So, Lou, it's always good to see you. I appreciate you helping me out. This doctor that killed his kids, what do we know about the doctor?
Well, it was in the 1880s. He was a practicing physician. His name was Dr. John Maxwell. He lived about 2,500 feet from your client's property.
Now, you did mention on the phone that he had 4 kids.
Yes, and a wife named Clara.
All right, so this poisoning, what the hell happened?
Well, on November 26, 1884, Dr. Maxwell lures his kids into a bedroom and he gives them a very deadly poison, aconite, and chloroform.
So what happens?
He then follows up and does the same thing to himself, drinks the same lethal cocktail and lays down with them.
All right, so where the hell's Clara, the wife?
But she was out of town. And when she got back home, she finds the whole family's basically in different states of consciousness or delirium. And she calls authorities and they try to revive as many as they can.
Okay, so did they succeed at all?
Well, they were able to revive the doctor, Dr. John Maxwell, and the oldest daughter, 13-year-old Grace.
The little girl is Victorian looking. I might actually put her a little older, just the way she's like being, like more like a preteen or new teen or whatever. Seems like her dad wasn't around so much. She has issues with that for some reason. I'm hearing something about doctor. She just feels let down. Her parents let her down. I think she had a fucked up family and she has a lot of bitterness and resentment built up. She's a fucking kid and, you know, just gets angry.
Okay, so this doctor gets revived, and the oldest daughter, who's 13, but the other 3 kids are dead. How old were they?
Well, Laura was 12,
Okay.
and then there was Kenneth, he was 4, and Arthur was 5.
On the phone you had mentioned was about money and depression.
The doctor was having all kinds of problems. He had a lot of legal problems and a lot of financial problems.
All right, so we got a murder-suicide, obviously, and he's alive. What happens to him?
He actually is arrested, but he hangs himself with a towel in jail. The coroner determined that he had lesions on his brain and said he was probably insane at the time of the murders and the time of his own suicide.
So now the wife's left with her 1 surviving kid. I mean, what the hell happened to her?
She ended up losing her house, and then she moved in with Grace, and eventually she dies of liver cancer.
I'm seeing the old lady again. The way she's all presenting herself is very Victorian era. She's showing me men, and like basically she feels like they fucked up her life. She's like yelling at this guy. Something about like caskets and darkness, and then she's like, shut up. And something about money, like wasting money. I feel like she owned this place, or she didn't own it, but she kind of owned it, but not really. And she's like angry about that. Like she's angry about the ownership. Like it should have been hers. And I kind of think that maybe she died here.
Any idea how?
She said she had an illness, some kind of illness.
So far, I've got a couple whose marriage is falling apart. On a property close to where a deranged doctor poisoned and killed 3 of his kids. But I want to see if there's anything else. Searching through old records, I find Charles Brettany, one of the original owners of Rodney and Carolyn's house. Turns out, Charles died of a stroke shortly after moving in.
So I've reached out to a local historian who I know, and she knows all about the Brettany family and says Charles' death was just the beginning of the family's suffering on the property.
So, Natalie, it's good to see you again. Appreciate you helping me out. I know that Charles died in 1893. Okay, so it was a few years after they moved into the house. Did he die in the house?
He did. It was a tragic death. It was listed as paralysis of the brain, which is basically what they would call a stroke today. He was 58.
So now on the phone, you mentioned that Charles' death was like the beginning of the tragedy. What happened?
Well, in 1912, his widow, Josephine, dies of senility, basically what we would consider dementia.
Okay, how old was she?
She was 68.
Did she die in the house?
Yes, she did. And here's her death certificate.
Anything else?
Well, in 1922, their daughter, Leontine, leaves to move to Los Angeles at the age of 43.
Okay.
And after she'd been there 3 years, she was standing by an open fireplace, and she ends up catching fire, and she dies from the burns.
Oh, geez. Sorry, so that made her 46 when she died, right?
Yes.
So this family really can't catch a break. Anything else?
Their youngest son, Ralph, was still living in the home in 1945 when he died suddenly of a cerebral hemorrhage. And he was only 62.
So the family that started out prosperous, basically, right?
Yes.
Had nothing but tragedy follow.
Right.
The old lady, she's claiming to have only killed a handful of people. Handful of people over like, what, 100 years or more? You know, like that's serial killer-ish numbers. I don't think that all these things that happened in this house. It seems to be over time. That's what she's claiming she can do, just death.
So another thing caught my eye in research. There was a brutal lynching that happened right near Rodney's house. I'm heading over to meet with a local sheriff's lieutenant. Now, he's looking into this case for me and says while all lynchings are horrifying, this one is especially brutal.
All right, Chris, it's good to see you again. So this guy that got lynched, who was this guy?
He's an African-American male who went by several names, but he's known here in Springfield as Richard Dixon. He lived with his girlfriend, who was a cook, in a house about 3,500 feet from your client's property.
Okay, so what happened?
On March 7th of 1904, Mr. Dixon and his girlfriend had been having arguments, and they had broken up, so he was not living in the house. Mr. Dixon was attempting to get some of the items that he had shared with his girlfriend, but the landlord wouldn't let him in to get his property. So Mr. Dixon went to the police for assistance.
All right, so it'd be a clothes job in New York. You know, go get your clothes. You need the help of the cops to get in.
Right. Mr. Dixon makes contact with Officer Charles Collis from the Springfield Police Division. So he went with Mr. Dixon back to the property to get in and get his items from the girlfriend.
Seems like everything's okay at this point?
Until this point. In the course of getting his items, Mr. Dixon and his girlfriend get into another argument while Officer Collis is standing there. Mr. Dixon, in the middle of the argument, pulls out a gun and shoots his girlfriend in the shoulder.
So this guy is packed while he's at the house with the cop?
Correct.
That's brilliant.
Collis attempts to intervene and goes for his own weapon. But Mr. Dixon, already having his gun out, turns and fires on Officer Collis, striking him in the abdomen and the shoulder.
Is he DOA at this point?
No, surprisingly not. Mr. Dixon flees from the property with Officer Collis in pursuit, wounded, firing at him from his own gun. He doesn't hit Mr. Dixon, and Mr. Dixon, in his fear, runs into the police station. He surrenders to the police officers in the station. Collis runs up to the steps in front of the police department and collapses. and Officer Collis became Springfield Police Division's first fallen officer.
What happens next?
Dixon was housed in the old jail, which sat right over there a couple of blocks over.
Okay.
Because Officer Collis was so popular, there was a large mob that grew to 1,500 people.
Wow.
The crowd cut the power to the jail, and they then broke their way into the building. They demanded from the sheriff that Dixon be handed over to the mob, or they would kill every prisoner in the building. Well, to save the other prisoners, Sheriff Routson allowed the mob to take Dixon out of the building. They dragged him out into the courtyard behind the jail, and they beat him until every bone in his body was broken. They then shot him 9 times while he was in that area, which is what caused his death. After he was killed, the mob carried him down the street and hung his lifeless body from a light pole. The mob then continued into the African-American section of town and burned down businesses, residences, and shops.
So this is tragic. History like this really pisses me off.
Yes.
Boy. I just feel really like sick down here. I don't know, it just feels like I'm outside. Like my back hurts down here. I don't know. I'm getting attacked from behind. And I felt rope being pulled around this man's neck. I saw several disturbing things on my walk, but the old lady tormenting the living has me the most concerned. She's wearing a solid black dress. She's also wearing a very intricate, long veil, and she's decomposing. She has flesh on her, but with skin on bones. I want to show her interacting with a living male. She's just pushing him from behind. There would be like these little gaps, see? Next, I described how she used her victims to attack the living. The other dead people are like behind her. And then a living person in a bed, like sitting up with this dead chick. Like maybe puppet strings.
Amy, is that what you saw?
Yes, that's what I saw.
Now that Amy and I have completed our investigations, we're ready to reveal our findings to each other and our clients for the first time. So, Amy, Rodney and his wife, Carolyn, have been married for about 11 years now. Now they're close to splitting up. A few years ago, they bought this big house and moved in together. The plan was to restore it, but now they're convinced that the house is trying to kill them both. So, now that Amy knows a little bit about you guys, she'll tell us about her walk.
So the dead person I want to discuss first is a young female. Her age, I don't know, 9 to 12, definitely like Victorian era. She does interact with the living. She'll stomp around and make a lot of noise stomping. And she's showing me somebody's sleeping and she just grabs some of their hair and yanks it.
I've had my hair pulled multiple times, and the stomping.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't hardly sleep at all.
Tell her where you sleep.
I've been sleeping in a recliner in the TV room.
Oh my gosh.
This little shit do anything else?
She's very angry, and that's due to her family that she had when she was alive. She definitely feels like her parents let her down. What really can get her triggered is seeing happy families. She becomes very jealous, and so she does everything she can to ruin that. Some of the things that she'll do is try to create miscommunication and, getting animosity to grow within the family.
Remember when I said that their marriage is in trouble? Since they moved here, I feel they've changed.
We just argue about the smallest things.
And how long were you guys together before you moved into the house?
About 7 years.
Really?
Yeah.
My heart just hurts. It really does. She's a good woman. I am afraid to lose her.
All right, anything else?
This one is very dangerous. I really did not like this older woman. She made me feel very nervous. I'd say she was in her 80s or 90s. Her face and body are literally in the decomp state. She's wearing all black, so a black long dress, and also a black long veil.
So, Carolyn, why'd you wince when Amy said that the old lady had a decomposing body and face?
When I was sleeping in my bedroom, something was bothering me, and I looked up, and there was, I only saw a face, but it looked like it was almost wrapped in dirty gauze, possibly decomposing.
The weird thing, she does carry a dead baby around in a sheet. She looked like Victorian era, just from the lace patterning and how she was dressed. Looked like morning wear almost.
Do you remember Ashley's story about a woman coming into the room and comforting the baby and she thought it was you?
Yes.
Tell Amy what happened.
My stepdaughter stayed over with her baby, and he started to fuss and cry a little bit. And she saw somebody come in and comfort him, and he settled down, and she thought it was me, and it was not me.
Oh, okay. She feels like the place should have been hers. She showed me that 2 men, and she felt like these 2 men fucked up her life. Therefore, now she hates men. She had some financial issues, and she told me that she did die from an illness.
Woman carrying a dead baby, hates men, money problems, died from an illness. It's making me think about a really sad story I came across in my investigation. The woman's name was Clara Maxwell, and she lived down the street from here. Now, on November 26, 1884, she came home to find her husband and 4 children passed out on the floor. Now, turns out the husband, who was a doctor, gave the kids a dose of aconite, which is a poison, and then took some himself. By the time help arrived, 3 of the kids were dead. Now, the victims were a 12-year-old girl named Laura and 2 boys. One was 4, the other one was 5. The only surviving girl was the oldest, 13-year-old Grace. Now, Dr. Maxwell was also saved, but he was arrested and hung himself in a jail about a week later. Now, as far as why he did it, turns out it was depression and money problems. Now, you said you saw the woman died of an illness. Clara ended up living with her surviving daughter, Grace, and her husband, and she died of liver cancer at the age of 75. Pretty sad story. Whether it's Clara or not, I'm not really sure. So, I mean, any ideas?
Yeah. It's her.
Now, the little girl you saw, so when you said 9 to 12, right?
Yeah.
One of the kids that's dead is 12.
I know. That's what I'm wondering, if that's Laura, because then her parents failing her.
Now, you said the old lady was a threat, though, right?
Yeah. She is very aggressive. When I walked in the front door and you walk straight back and then to the right.
I sleep there. That's my room.
That room is not good. Okay. She told me that she's capable of making the living very ill.
I first had cancer back in 2002.
Before living in the house?
Before living in the house.
Okay.
And I was pretty much, I thought I was free of cancer. When I came to this house, it was about 2 summers ago. My cancer reoccurred, had to have another surgery. And last week I had another cancer surgery.
Rodney's health issues are through the roof.
Diabetes, heart, liver.
Other than the health problems, can she do anything else?
When I walked into the front bedroom, I saw a living man was getting messed with in there. I had a sketch done of what all was occurring.
It's definitely a decomposing face.
It's absolutely horrifying.
Oh my God. I don't even know what to say to that. It's terrifying.
It makes me go back to when I told you I felt like I was being stalked all the time.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I thought of her when you said that.
Well, we've had other physical experiences on that first floor here.
I was held down in bed one day, and the more I fought, the more it wouldn't let me go. And I know when I got up, I was so angry. I told it was my house. Don't do that to me.
Good.
I actually was sitting in the recliner. I heard something walk into the room with me, and I literally heard it sit on the couch and tear beside it.
Interesting.
Oh, she probably hates Rodney from what you're telling me, right? She hates him?
Oh, yeah.
I'm terrified.
Everything to make sense, though,
Yeah.
what's going on in our lives.
Yeah, it all pieces together now.
She told me that there are a handful of people who have died here, and she claims to be the one who killed them. And she did tell me that she can really easily harm people if they're already susceptible.
Now, you said she took responsibility for killing some people in the house, right?
Yes.
Now, you should probably know about the Brettany family. They bought the property in 1890 and then had the house built. Took about 5 years. Now, the family was successful. Now, in 1893, the patriarch of the family, Charles, died suddenly of what was called paralysis of the brain. What today would be a stroke. Record of death, he's number 33 on this list here. And he was only 57 years old. Now, in 1912, his widow Josephine died at the home from senility. She was 68. In 1925, their 46-year-old daughter, Leontine, died a horrible death. It actually happened in LA, in Los Angeles. She was standing next to a fireplace and her dress caught fire and she burned to death. Then in 1945, their youngest son, Ralph, dropped dead in the house from a sudden cerebral hemorrhage. So now that's 4 deaths in this family, 3 in the house. The lady said she's good at killing people. Did she have anything to do with these illnesses, how they died?
Yeah. So one of the things that she claims she does is to use these people that she supposedly murdered to harass the living with. In the front bedroom, I saw her picking up dead people and literally throwing them at the living. And I had a sketch done of what she showed me.
Well, this is fucked up right here.
Oh my God.
Absolutely terrified. Every time I lay in there, I feel like I'm stalked. Makes perfect sense.
She really doesn't want anyone here in this house. And I'm worried, obviously, about you because she hates men in general and she's, probably on your ass all the time. I'm hoping that we're here in time.
I don't even know what to say.
Okay, guys, you finally know what's going on here. But now we're going to answer the big question. Can you stay here in your dream house as a healthy and happy couple? Or do you need to get the hell out of here? For that answer, I'm going to turn it over to Amy.
There are some things you're going to need to do. We're going to bring in a team, and this will include several sensitives who have different types of abilities. First, they're going to move on the little girl, Laura. She does want to leave. So she'll be very easy to move on. Then Clara's going to be moved on. Once they're done with that, the team will remove as much residual energy as possible. Once that energy's removed, you guys are going to be feeling a lot better. Once all this is done, the team will put up a general barrier around your property just to give you guys time to just heal.
And how you feel, Carol?
I feel very relieved.
Now we can hopefully finish our home we dreamed about.
We'll finish it. We will finish it.
It's awesome.
After everything gets better for them, they should be able to sleep in their own bed together. Right?
The Everglades stretched out before them like a vast, murky ocean of green, waterlogged forests, and tangled mangroves, the air thick with humidity and the pungent, earthy scent of decay that seemed to cling to everything, seeping into clothes, hair, and lungs alike, and Amy Ellen, stepping lightly over the spongy ground, felt a shiver run down her spine as she noticed the unnatural silence that enveloped the swamp. Even the usual chorus of croaking frogs and buzzing insects seemed muted, as if the land itself were holding its breath, waiting for something dark and ancient to stir beneath the mirrored surface of the shallow waters. She glanced over at Steve Disciovi, who was busy jotting notes in his weathered notebook, his expression a mixture of skepticism and concern, the lines around his eyes deepening as he observed the rundown, more straight cabin that loomed ahead, its rotting wood warped and blackened by years of neglect and relentless Florida rains, a place that looked as though it had been abandoned decades ago, yet somehow seemed to hum with a malevolent energy, a presence that both fascinated and repelled them. According to the family who had contacted the show, strange occurrences had been escalating over the past several months, doors slamming without cause, objects moving on their own, footsteps echoing in empty hallways, and a chilling sensation of being watched that left them sleepless and terrified, the culmination of years of unease that they could no longer ignore, pushing them to seek the expertise of those who dealt with the unseen, the borderline between the living and whatever force had made this place its home. Amy knelt by the threshold of the cabin, her hand brushing lightly against the rough wood, feeling the subtle vibration beneath her fingertips, a tremor of energy that spoke of memories etched into the very grain of the structure, and as she closed her eyes, she began the delicate process of opening herself to whatever spirit might reveal itself, allowing impressions, emotions, and fleeting images to flow into her consciousness, a mosaic of terror and anguish that the ordinary eye could never perceive. The first sensations were almost like whispers carried on the humid air, a feeling of suffocation, a heaviness in the chest, and the taste of iron on the tongue, as though the swamp itself blared a warning. Amy could feel the temperature drop even in the oppressive heat, a cold that radiated not from the air but from something living, something resentful, something that had existed long before any human had dared stake claim to this land. Steve, meanwhile, was interviewing the homeowners, a young couple who had moved here seeking solace from the chaos of city life, unaware that the tranquility they hoped to find was an illusion crafted by the Everglades' deceptive calm. The husband, his hands trembling as he recounted events, spoke of waking to find muddy footprints crossing the bedroom floor, heavy and white, as though some creature or entity had paced in silent fury, and of the eerie sensation that their daughter's laughter, sweet and innocent, would sometimes echo down hallways when she was nowhere near, as if the walls themselves carried a mockery of the family's once happy life. The wife described an incident where she had discovered her kitchen knife scattered across the counters in impossible patterns, their edges reflecting moonlight in a way that seemed almost deliberate, a message written in steel rather than words, accompanied by a sudden, suffocating sense of dread that forced her to flee outdoors into the swamp, only to find the air thick with the scent of decay, like something dead yet moving, something that had absorbed the essence of every creature unfortunate enough to die in these wetlands over centuries. Amy's senses began to sharpen, picking up impressions from the environment itself, the swamp not just a backdrop but a character in the story of this haunting, saturated with energy from countless deaths, from tragedies both human and natural, forming a tapestry of grief, anger, and unresolved despair, interwoven with the greed, cruelty, and desperation of those who had settled here and failed to respect the delicate balance of the land. She could feel layers of history pressing against her mind, images of a young Seminole boy running barefoot through knee-high waters, of poachers dragging their traps through the reeds, of lost settlers and sunken canoes, all coalescing into a single, palpable entity that seemed aware of her presence, judging her intrusion, and yet, surprisingly, allowing her passage as long as she approached with respect and focus, as if the Everglades themselves were testing the intentions of these visitors. From the outside world, Steve, skeptical as ever, watched her closely, noting the slight tremor in her hands and the distant gaze that suggested she was communicating with something beyond the veil of ordinary perception. He knew Amy's reputation and the rigorous methods she employed to maintain credibility, but even he could not ignore the tension building in the air, a pressure that caused the hairs on the back of his neck to stand erect, a forewarning that the events about to unfold would be unlike anything they had encountered in previous cases. The family's home seemed to breathe around them, the windows like dark, unblinking eyes reflecting the swamp's murky waters, and as twilight descended, casting long, distorted shadows across the property, the feeling of being observed intensified, every rustle of the wind through Spanish moss carrying with it a suggestion of movement, of something just beyond the edge of vision, waiting, watching, and calculating. Amy began her walkthrough of the cabin's interior, moving with deliberate care, her senses scanning every corner, floorboard, and shadow, feeling the residual emotions embedded in the structure, fear, desperation, rage, sorrow, all coalescing into a narrative that spoke not just of the events of the present but of generations of suffering and unrest, a story written in the silent language of the past. The air inside was thick, almost tangible, charged with a presence that seemed to whisper in a language older than English, older than any dialect she recognized, yet somehow comprehensible in its intent, a warning, a claim, a demand for acknowledgement. In the dim light, she could see the remnants of previous inhabitants, a photo frame tilted askew, a chair moved slightly from its usual position, the faint imprint of footprints in dust that seemed too deliberate to be accidental, and with each step, the cabin seemed to react, groaning and creaking as if under strain, echoing her movements in a way that made the space feel alive, sentient, and decidedly hostile. Steve continued his interview, piecing together the narrative from the family's fragmented recollections, noting the escalating intensity of the phenomena, from minor disturbances to events that defied logical explanation, building a case that suggested an external, intelligent influence rather than mere coincidence or the imagination of fearful residents. Outside, the Everglades' nocturnal symphony rose, the calls of unseen creatures mingling with the rustling of leaves, and Amy felt a surge of energy, a thread connecting the present moment to centuries of accumulated emotions and unfinished business, a sense that she was standing at a crossroads between human perception and the dark, complex ecosystem of spiritual and natural forces that govern this place. As she reached the back of the cabin, near the edge of a swampy clearing, the temperature dropped sharply, her breath visible in the humid air, and she felt the unmistakable presence of something sentient, something that had observed and perhaps even influenced the lives of those who had crossed into its domain, a being whose motives were inscrutable, whose existence had been sustained by fear, neglect, and the secrets buried beneath layers of mud and moss. Her mind raced, cataloging impressions, emotions, and warnings, forming a mental map of the haunted terrain, aware that every decision, every movement, every word could provoke a reaction from whatever entity lingered in the shadows, and that the family's safety, and their understanding of the truth, depended on her ability to interpret these signs accurately, without fear clouding her judgment or the swamp's deceptive tranquility luring them into complacency. The night deepened, stars obscured by thick, low-hanging clouds, and a sudden movement in the underbrush caused both Amy and Steve to freeze, their instincts on high alert. A raccoon, or something larger? The shadow elongated unnaturally, shifting with intent rather than randomness, and a chill ran through Steve despite the heat, the sensation of being watched intensifying to the point of palpable pressure against their bodies. Amy exhaled slowly, centering herself, calling upon years of experience, focusing on clarity and perception, and as she did, she sensed her presence materialize more clearly, a malevolent consciousness, restless and probing, curious about these outsiders daring to enter its domain, and she felt the weight of responsibility pressing down, knowing that misinterpretation or misstep could provoke consequences far beyond mere fright. The family huddled together in the living room, unaware of the full scale of what Amy was confronting, yet instinctively sensing the severity of the situation, their eyes wide, their bodies tense, the youngest clutching a stuffed animal, whispering prayers they barely understood. Amy signaled Steve to follow her to a small, dimly lit room at the far end of the cabin, a room that pulsed with residual energy, a focal point of the disturbances, where objects had moved, shadows had lingered, and an oppressive atmosphere had been consistently reported. Kneeling, she allowed herself to merge with the impressions lingering in the space, a mosaic of past tragedies and ongoing unrest, and she felt the narrative of the haunting coalesce, a chain of events tied to greed, betrayal, and unresolved vengeance, anchored in both the physical and spiritual fabric of the Everglades, a presence shaped by human actions yet evolved into something more primal, more enduring than the individuals who had initially given it form. Outside, the swamp seemed to react, nocturnal sounds warping into strange patterns, water rippling without wind, a faint, sorrowful wail echoing across the wetlands, a cry that was human in tone but layered with something else entirely, something older, angrier, and infinitely patient, reminding all who listened that the Everglades held memories that refused to fade, and spirits that would not rest until acknowledged, understood, or appeased. Amy stood, her body tense yet controlled, her mind cataloging the impressions, her senses aligned with the subtle currents of energy, aware that this investigation would not be resolved in hours or even days, but that every careful step, every accurate reading, every respectful engagement could prevent harm and uncover the truths hidden in this remote, foreboding corner of Florida, truths that had long been buried under mud, water, and the shadows of human ambition and neglect. And as she prepared to guide the family through what needed to be done, rituals, acknowledgments, protective measures, and strategies to reclaim their home from the dark weight of history, the Everglades pressed in around them, silent but watchful, a living testament to the persistence of memory, spirit, and the sometimes terrifying interface between the natural and supernatural worlds, promising that their journey had only just begun, that the forces at play were ancient and cunning, and that the cabin, the swamp, and the spirits that inhabited them would continue to challenge, test, and reveal truths in ways both subtle and shocking, drawing Amy and Steve deeper into a mystery that intertwined the lives of the living with the restless echoes of the dead, and forcing everyone present to confront not only what lurked in the shadows outside but also what lingered, unacknowledged, within themselves. The next morning dawned heavy and gray, the Everglades shrouded in mist that clung to the treetops and obscured the shallow waterways like a curtain, and as Amy Ellen stepped out onto the wooden porch, the damp air seemed to pulse with latent energy, a subtle vibration that suggested the previous night's events were only the beginning, that the entity, or entities, responsible for the haunting were already aware of the intruder's presence and were planning their next moves with a patience and intelligence that defied human comprehension. She inhaled slowly, letting the humid air fill her lungs, tasting the faint iron tang and the rot of the wetlands, and she felt the familiar, unsettling sensation of ice upon her, not animal ice, but sentient, calculating, waiting, and she knew that what had begun as a series of minor disturbances was now escalating, that the forces at work were drawing a line, delineating territory, and making clear that every action, every sound, every word spoken in the domain of the Everglades carried weight far beyond ordinary consequences. Steve Discovery emerged behind her, carrying his notebook and a thermos of coffee, his brow furrowed, the early light casting deep shadows across his face, and though he maintained his skeptical demeanor, there was a tension in his shoulders, a subtle tightening of his jaw, a recognition that the environment was hostile in ways that he could neither dismiss nor fully understand. He followed Amy to the edge of the swamp, where the water met the mossy banks, noting how the reeds swayed unnaturally, as if moved by some invisible hand, and how the occasional splash of a fish or turtle seemed timed, deliberate, almost theatrical, an orchestrated display meant to unsettle those who dared intrude. The family had agreed to accompany them into the swamp, albeit hesitantly, led by the promise of understanding, of regaining some semblance of control over their home, but the eldest daughter clung to her mother, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination, whispering questions that Amy could barely answer, aware that children were often more sensitive to these presences, attuned to the currents of energy that flowed unseen, and that their perceptions could provide insight that even the most experienced investigators might miss. As they waded into the shallow, murky waters, the mud clinging to boots and feet, Amy began to sense patterns, subtle disturbances in the energy field, areas where the malevolent presence concentrated, each cluster telling a story, revealing fragments of past events, injustices, deaths, and betrayals that had left permanent marks on the land. She moved with a quiet, deliberate grace, attuned to shifts in temperature, sound, and vibration, the way one might track an animal by subtle signs in the environment, yet these signs were spiritual in nature, ephemeral yet potent, and she felt a pulse in the soil beneath her, a rhythm that was both warning and invitation, daring her to follow. Steve took careful notes, documenting the family's reactions, the environmental oddities, and Amy's descriptions of impressions, occasionally asking clarifying questions, yet he remained grounded in his investigative instincts, always aware that while Amy interpreted the spiritual elements, the tangible world still demanded observation, measurement, and context. He noted the increased frequency of small, seemingly minor phenomena, water rippling where no current existed, birds fleeing suddenly, the oppressive weight in the air that pressed against chest and necks alike, and he felt the mounting sense that the Everglades were alive in ways both ecological and supernatural, a living system that integrated the memories, emotions, and unfinished business of those who had perished within its expanse. The family led them to a small clearing where an old stone well had long since fallen into disrepair, its edges crumbling and covered in algae and vines, and Amy felt an immediate, visceral reaction, a spike in energy that drew her closer, urging her to peer into the darkness within. She sensed layers of tragedy tied to the well, a sequence of events marked by desperation and loss, and as she focused, faint images coalesced in her mind, figures peering over the edge, their faces twisted in fear or agony, objects falling into the water, the muffled sound of voices swallowed by darkness, and the persistent echo of grief that seemed to have become part of the well itself, an anchor for the unsettled spirits that lingered nearby. Steve crouched at the edge, notebook open, noting the dampness, the smell, the patterns of surrounding vegetation, and while he did not see the spectral images that Amy perceived, he felt the intensity, a tangible pressure in the air that set his teeth on edge and made his skin prickle, confirming that something unusual was present, something that had affected both the physical environment and the family's sense of safety. Amy, sensing a connection between the well and the disturbances within the cabin, instructed the family to remain at a safe distance while she approached more closely, feeling the pull of the energy, a gravitational force of spiritual significance that demanded respect, caution, and focus. As she circled the well, tracing its perimeter, she began to pick up impressions of a man, violent and angry in life, whose actions had left a deep wound on the land, whose presence now mingled with those who had suffered, creating a complex tapestry of malice, resentment, and lingering sorrow that needed careful unraveling. The deeper she went into her impressions, the more vivid the images became, the man's interactions with his neighbors, his threats, the sudden, tragic accidents that followed, and the resultant accumulation of fear and hostility, A chain reaction of human emotion crystallized into spiritual energy, tied irrevocably to the geography of the swamp, creating pockets of intense activity that radiated outward and intruded into the lives of the living. Steve, noticing the family's unease, gently guided them back toward a patch of higher ground, speaking in calm, rational tones, reminding them to breathe, to observe the surroundings without panic. But even as he did, he could not ignore the growing evidence that the phenomena were escalating, a rustling in the dense foliage, a shadow that seemed too deliberate to belong to a bird or animal, the sudden, fleeting flash of movement across the water that left no trace, all signaling that the entity was aware, adapting, perhaps even testing their presence. Amy, meanwhile, moved with focused intensity, reading the energy as though it were a topographical map, identifying notes of unrest, tracing their origins, and noting the pathways through which the presence communicated its discontent. Each step, each adjustment of her focus revealed more about the complex interaction between the human and spiritual layers of the swamp, the intertwined histories that had culminated in the present haunting, and the way in which the environment itself seemed to amplify and sustain the malevolent forces. The family's daughter, unable to resist her curiosity, wandered slightly off the path, drawn by an unseen lure, and Amy called out with calm authority, feeling the surge of energy ripple through her body as she sensed the entity's focus shift, momentarily intrigued by the child, assessing the threat or opportunity that her presence represented. Steve reacted immediately, moving to intercept, but not before Amy whispered protective instructions, a verbal shield designed to deter spiritual engagement and maintain safety, an approach honed over years of field experience and delicate interaction with the unknown. As they regrouped, Amy shared her initial impressions with Steve, describing the violent male energy at the well, the sorrowful residual spirits attached to the cabin, and the complex, layered interaction that was fueling the disturbances. She noted that the malevolent presence, while powerful, was not omnipotent, that it reacted to acknowledgement, to respectful engagement, and that their intervention could mitigate the intensity, restore balance, and allow the family to reclaim their home without fear, provided they followed precise steps and respected the swamp's intricate web of spiritual ecology. The family, listening intently, nodded, their fear tempered by the hope that understanding could lead to resolution, yet they could not deny the palpable tension in the air, the way the mist seemed to thicken and swirl around them, carrying with it the echoes of unseen ice, the faint hiss of water displaced by invisible movements, and the subtle vibration beneath their feet, a reminder that the swamp had memory, awareness, and agency, and that the forces at work were far more intelligent and deliberate than they could have imagined. Amy led a brief, cautious ritual at the well, incorporating elements intended to acknowledge, respect, and redirect the spiritual energies, while Steve documented the process, noting the family's reactions, environmental cues, and any unusual activity, all while remaining vigilant, ready to respond should the situation escalate unexpectedly. The ritual, simple yet precise, involved verbal acknowledgement of past suffering, protective boundaries, and an invitation for restless spirits to move beyond the physical plane, a practice drawn from both historical precedent and field experience, designed to harmonize human and spiritual interests without provoking unnecessary conflict. As the ritual progressed, subtle changes became apparent. The oppressive weight of the air eased slightly, the vibration beneath their feet softened, and the sense of being watched shifted from threatening to curious, indicating that the energy was responsive, capable of adaptation, and that their approach was being registered and understood. Amy felt a tentative sense of progress, recognizing that the presence, while still potent, was now engaging with them on terms that allowed for negotiation, acknowledgement, and potential resolution. Steve observed the family, noting how their demeanor shifted from fear to cautious hope, how their movements became less hesitant, and how the swamp itself seemed to respond to the human presence with less hostility. The small ripples in the water, the gentle sway of branches, and the distant calls of nocturnal creatures signaling a tentative equilibrium, a fragile balance achieved through respect, focus, and deliberate action. As the day waned and shadows lengthened once more across the swamp, Amy and Steve guided the family back to the cabin, aware that their work was far from complete, that the well was only one node in a complex network of disturbances, and that the entity or entities responsible had already demonstrated intelligence, adaptability, and persistence, qualities that required ongoing observation, intervention, and sensitivity. Yet for the moment, the immediate danger had lessened, giving all involved a fleeting sense of control and a glimpse of hope that with careful, continued effort, the balance of the Everglades and the safety of the family could be maintained. The night air settled in around them as they approached the cabin, thick with humidity and the lingering echo of the swamp's unique sounds, a symphony both natural and supernatural, reminding Amy and Steve that every moment in this environment carried significance, that the land itself was alive with memory, and that the path forward would demand vigilance, insight, and unwavering respect for the ancient, often invisible forces that governed the Everglades, forces that could nurture, protect, or devastate depending on the choices of those who dared to enter their domain, and that the events set into motion today would ripple outward, influencing both the living and the restless spirits for nights yet to come. The next few days settled into a tense rhythm, the swamp asserting its presence with subtle but persistent reminders that it was a living, sentient entity, and Amy Ellen found herself increasingly attuned to the delicate interplay of energies that governed the haunted landscape, feeling not only the malevolent force tied to the cabin and the well but also the residual, sorrowful echoes of lives lost to the swamp's treacherous embrace over centuries, each layer of energy overlapping the next, forming a dense, almost impenetrable tapestry that required careful navigation, intuition, and disciplined focus to read accurately. The family, growing both wary and grateful, remained close, their movements deliberate as they assisted in small tasks, retrieving objects, observing patterns, and recounting new occurrences, all while their fears gradually shifted into a cautious hope that Amy and Steve's presence might bring resolution. The swamp, ever dynamic, seemed to respond to their passage, the water rippling in slow, deliberate waves that defied wind or movement, shadows twisting unnaturally among the mangroves, and the low, almost imperceptible hum of unseen creatures adding a layer of tension to every step, a reminder that the Everglades were both a physical and spiritual ecosystem, where nature and supernatural intersected in ways that defied conventional understanding. Amy spent long hours moving through the cabin, touching surfaces, feeling the energy embedded in each floorboard, wall, and window, reconstructing the narrative of the haunting piece by piece, the violent anger of a man whose death had gone unacknowledged, the sorrow of a woman left behind, the despair of children who had vanished without record, each spirit leaving an indelible mark upon the land, intertwining with the events of the present, shaping the fears, anxieties, and phenomena experienced by the current family. Steve's role was both practical and supportive. He documented environmental anomalies, monitored the family's safety, and engaged in careful interviews, attempting to correlate historical records with Amy's impressions, noting patterns of deaths, accidents, and disappearances that seemed to cluster geographically and temporally around key points in the swamp, reinforcing the hypothesis that the haunting was not random but organized around unresolved historical events, a network of energy tied to injustice, neglect, and mortality. During one particularly oppressive afternoon, Amy ventured into a dense portion of the mangrove forest near the back of the property, drawn by a series of impressions she could not fully decipher from the cabin alone. The ground was a spongy mixture of mud and decaying leaves, and every step seemed to activate subtle shifts in energy, tiny ripples in the spiritual fabric of the swamp that hinted at hidden pathways, secret notes of residual activity, and perhaps even objects or remains that had been left undisturbed for decades, the accumulation of countless tragedies now coalescing into a force of tangible weight. She paused at a clearing where a fallen cypress tree had created a natural breach over a stagnant pool, the air thick with humidity and the faint, almost imperceptible scent of iron and rot, and there she felt the unmistakable signature of the man whose malevolence had first anchored the haunting, a presence so potent that it seemed to bend reality subtly around it. The moss swayed without wind, insects fell silent, and the water shimmered unnaturally, reflecting shadows that moved independently of the environment. As Amy focused, she began to perceive not just the man's rage, but his history, a narrative of violence, betrayal, and desperation, intertwined with the swamp itself, the pattern of his life leaving energy imprints that could now influence the living, a spectral web that reached into the cabin, the well, and beyond, feeding on fear, misfortune, and unresolved grief, and she understood that to resolve the haunting, these layered energies had to be addressed with both precision and respect. Steve, observing from a safe distance, could sense her concentration, noting the slight tremor in her hands, the fixed intensity of her gaze, the way her entire body seemed to synchronize with the subtle rhythms of the swamp, and though he could not interpret the images she received, he recognized the significance of her findings, understanding that the patterns she revealed were consistent with the most complex and dangerous cases they had ever encountered. The family, watching anxiously, witnessed small but significant changes. A previously closed window rattled briefly as if responding to Amy's energy, a chair shifted slightly without explanation, and faint, whisper-like sounds rose and fell in cadence with the investigators' movements, confirming that their work was eliciting a reaction, that the entities present were aware, engaged, and responsive, and that the next phase of intervention would require both caution and authority, for the spirits were intelligent, adaptable, and potentially volatile. As the afternoon waned, Amy instructed Steve to assist her in locating a series of objects associated with the spiritual notes she had identified, a rusted iron key buried near the well, a fragment of clothing snagged in the mangrove roots, and a decayed journal page partially submerged in water, each item bearing residual energy, each a potential conduit for communication or release, and each requiring careful handling to avoid exacerbating the situation. Steve carefully documented their findings, photographing, measuring, and noting positions, while Amy interpreted the energy signatures, feeling the subtle shifts in the presence's focus, noting its responses to human touch, intention, and acknowledgement, and guiding the family in understanding that the swamp and its spirits were neither malicious nor arbitrary, but rather reacting according to patterns rooted in historical events, human emotion, and spiritual law, a complex ecosystem that demanded respect, recognition, and intervention. The eldest daughter, despite her initial fear, began to participate in minor ways, bringing small objects, repeating protective phrases, and observing Amy's instructions, her intuition surprisingly attuned to the subtle cues of the spirits, the timbre of the air, and the faint shifts in energy that even Steve could not detect, her role underscoring the importance of sensitivity, presence, and awareness when confronting a haunting of this magnitude. Amy paused at the central clearing, sensing a convergence of energies, a focal point that connected multiple layers of residual activity, the man's malevolence, the sorrow of lost children, the desperation of a woman abandoned in grief, and the cumulative distress of those who had suffered in the swamp over centuries. Each thread of energy intersected here, creating a complex lattice that both anchored and amplified the haunting, requiring a nuanced approach to disentangle, acknowledge, and redirect the forces at play. She instructed the family to form a protective circle while she moved deliberately within the clearing, her hands tracing symbolic gestures in the air, her voice articulating acknowledgement, guidance, and redirection, a ritualized engagement designed to establish boundaries, release trapped energy, and communicate the presence's need for recognition without confrontation. Steve monitored every detail, noting changes in temperature, humidity, sound, and movement, confirming the efficacy of Amy's methodology, while also documenting anomalies that defied conventional explanation, further validating the intersection of natural and supernatural forces. As the ritual progressed, subtle but significant changes manifested, the oppressive heaviness in the air lifted slightly, shadows receded from corners, small ripples on the water's surface aligned with Amy's gestures, and faint, melodic whispers, indistinct yet emotionally charged, echoed through the clearing, a sign that the spirits were not only listening but responding, an affirmation that engagement and respect could temper even the most persistent hauntings. By late afternoon, Amy concluded the session, signaling the family to gather their belongings and return to the cabin, noting the temporary stabilization of energies, the reassertion of natural environmental patterns, and the sense of cautious equilibrium that now permeated the property. She emphasized that while progress had been made, vigilance, continued observation, and periodic interventions would be necessary, as the swamp's energy was persistent, adaptive, and capable of responding unpredictably to both human presence and natural shifts. Back at the cabin, the family shared stories of subtle changes, a previously flickering light stabilized, unexplained noises diminished, and a general sense of peace, however tentative, began to replace the prior omnipresent anxiety. Amy and Steve discussed their next steps, reviewing data, impressions, and historical research, planning carefully for further investigation, targeted rituals, and ongoing monitoring to ensure that the forces tethered to the property could be acknowledged, respected, and, where necessary, guided toward resolution. As night fell, the Everglades' nocturnal chorus resumed, birds and insects creating a tapestry of sound that was at once natural and subtly influenced by the energy shifts, a living reminder that the swamp was a sentient landscape, one that had endured centuries of human intrusion, tragedy, and neglect, and that its lessons, warnings, and stories were communicated through both visible and invisible channels, demanding attention, respect, and understanding from all who entered. Amy, standing on the cabin's porch, gazed into the dense mangroves, feeling the weight of the swamp's memory, the accumulated sorrow, rage, and fear, and knew that their work was far from complete. The haunting was not simply a series of events to be documented, but a manifestation of history, energy, and consciousness, a convergence of human action and environmental response that required both empathy and precision, insight and courage, to navigate effectively, and that the next phase of their investigation would test their skills, their intuition, and their resilience in ways that could not yet be fully anticipated. The night air pressed in, humid and dense, carrying the faint sense of decay, vegetation, and lingering iron, and as Amy closed her eyes, she felt the interconnection of all the forces at play, the delicate balance of recognition, acknowledgement, and release, the way each action rippled through the ecosystem, and the awareness that they were participants in a story much larger than any single haunting, a narrative written over centuries, involving lives, deaths, and energies that refused to fade quietly into history, and that to intervene responsibly was to honor not only the living but the spectral, to mediate between worlds with care, respect, and unflinching attention to the truth embedded in the Everglades' shadowed heart. The following morning dawned heavy with mist, the Everglades seeming to exhale a slow, deliberate sigh as if aware of the ongoing intrusion into its domain, and Amy Allen, stepping cautiously onto the moss-laden porch of the cabin, felt the familiar tremor in the air, a vibration that spoke not of wind or wildlife, but of conscious observation, of eyes unseen tracking every movement, calculating, testing, and probing for weakness or insight, while Steve Disciovi moved methodically behind her. Notebook in hand, recording temperature fluctuations, humidity levels, and the increasingly erratic behavior of small creatures that skittered across the swamp's surface, all of which he suspected might indicate something more than natural phenomena, a reaction to the presence they were confronting. The family, weary from the previous day's immersion into the swamp and the rituals performed at the old cypress clearing, gathered reluctantly on the porch, their expressions a mixture of trepidation and tentative hope, aware that while immediate dangers had seemed to recede, the lingering tension suggested the Everglades were far from forgiving, that their home existed within a nexus of unresolved histories and energies that demanded respect, attentiveness, and a willingness to confront truths, both visible and invisible. Amy guided them through a careful, step-by-step explanation of what had been observed, the notes of residual energy, the malevolent presence linked to the violent man whose life had left permanent imprints on the swamp, and the ways in which these energies interacted with the family's environment, affecting objects, temperature, and psychological perception, all contributing to a sustained haunting that intensified as human fear and uncertainty accumulated, a cycle that required deliberate disruption through acknowledgement, ritual, and strategic engagement. Steve, meticulous as always, added context, correlating Amy's impressions with historical records he had unearthed, decades-old newspaper articles detailing disappearances, deaths by drowning, and unexplained accidents, property deeds revealing contentious ownership disputes, and personal letters and diaries that hinted at betrayal, grief, and malice, all converging to reinforce the notion that the haunting was neither random nor simple, but a complex ecosystem of human emotion, environmental response, and spiritual persistence, each layer reinforcing the next, creating a feedback loop that had endured for generations. As the family absorbed this information, Amy sensed a subtle shift in the energy around the cabin, a ripple that indicated the malevolent presence had registered their discussion, that it was aware of their growing understanding and the potential threat posed by recognition and intervention, and she knew that the next steps had to be executed with precision and authority, balancing respect for the spirits with the necessity of protecting the living. She instructed the family to remain in specific areas while she and Steve prepared to revisit the clearing and the well, targeting notes of concentrated energy for careful engagement, and as they moved through the swamp, the air grew dense, the mist thickened, and shadows elongated unnaturally, suggesting the presence's attention was focused entirely on them, a deliberate tracking that made every step feel both urgent and dangerous. At the clearing, Amy knelt near the base of the fallen cypress tree, her senses attuned to the faint tremors and whispers of residual energy, detecting subtle shifts that indicated layers of unresolved trauma, rage, and despair, and she realized that previous rituals had only scratched the surface, that the entity's network of influence was broader and more intricate than initially perceived, weaving through the swamp's geography, affecting both environment and human perception with subtle but insidious precision. Steve assisted by documenting spatial relationships, noting subtle changes in the water's surface, the sway of vegetation, and the temperature gradients across the clearing, while also maintaining situational awareness to protect both Amy and the family from potential escalation. He marveled at the complexity of the haunting, recognizing patterns that mirrored ecological systems, feedback loops, energy accumulation, and adaptive responses that suggested a sophisticated intelligence, whether human, spectral, or a fusion of both, manipulating its environment to maintain dominance and perpetuate its unresolved will. Amy focused her attention on a specific cluster of impressions, a knot of concentrated energy that pulsed with intensity, signaling a locus of past trauma and present malevolence. She sensed the violent man's spirit intertwined with residual sorrow from victims, the combined energies amplifying disturbances both inside the cabin and throughout the swamp, a multidimensional presence whose influence manifested in both psychological pressure and physical anomalies, and she knew that addressing this note would require precise acknowledgement, protective ritualization, and the invocation of boundaries designed to limit harm while facilitating release or redirection. Carefully, she directed the family to participate in specific actions, placing protective markers, vocalizing affirmations of acknowledgement and respect, and observing movements and gestures that were integral to stabilizing the energy without confrontation. These steps were small, deliberate, and psychologically empowering, offering the family agency in the process while minimizing risk. And Amy noted how their involvement seemed to slightly temper the intensity of the surrounding presence, as if recognition, attention, and intention created a buffer against unmitigated malevolence. The eldest daughter, still young yet increasingly attuned to subtle cues, instinctively mirrored Amy's gestures, her own energy harmonizing with the ritual, amplifying its effectiveness, and providing a poignant reminder that children, often sensitive to spiritual and emotional subtleties, could serve as both intuitive guides and stabilizing forces in complex hauntings, their perceptions extending beyond the limitations of adult rationality. As the day progressed, the interplay of observation, ritual, and environmental response revealed additional complexities. Areas of the swamp previously thought inert began to emit subtle vibrations, small ripples appeared in still water, and fleeting shadows moved in ways that suggested intelligence rather than randomness, all indicating that the malevolent presence was adaptive, responsive, and increasingly aware of the investigators' intentions and methods, testing boundaries, gauging risk, and potentially manipulating environmental cues to challenge their interventions. Steve carefully monitored these developments, noting correlations between Amy's engagement and shifts in energy, documenting changes in temperature, humidity, light, and sound, and observing how both the family and the environment responded to these dynamics, his analytical perspective complementing Amy's intuitive readings and providing a comprehensive framework for understanding the unfolding phenomena, while also reinforcing the necessity for meticulous documentation in both the spiritual and physical domains. At one point, Amy paused, sensing a particularly intense node of energy near the swamp's edge, a location marked by fallen trees, shallow water, and dense underbrush. She felt the weight of historical suffering and unresolved violence concentrated in this small area, recognizing that the malevolent man's influence was anchored here, and that the interaction of human emotion, spiritual unrest, and environmental responsiveness had created a focal point capable of influencing both perception and reality within the broader domain. Direct engagement required careful preparation, so she instructed Steve to establish a perimeter, using markers, boundaries, and control observation points to ensure safety, while she entered the focal area alone, attuning to subtle vibrations, auditory cues, and visual impressions. The swamp responded immediately, the mist thickening, shadows stretching, and the water rippling in deliberate patterns, confirming the presence's awareness and the potency of the energy they confronted. Amy immersed herself in the layered history of the site, perceiving not only the violent man's malevolence but also the interconnected sorrow, fear, and trauma of countless others whose lives had intersected with this location, the cumulative effect forming a complex lattice of spiritual tension, responsive to acknowledgement, intention, and respectful intervention. And she realized that resolution required more than ritual. It demanded careful negotiation, psychological insight, and a structured approach that honored both the living and the dead while maintaining control over escalating energy patterns. With deliberate, focused movements, Amy performed a series of acknowledgments, protective gestures, and verbalizations designed to communicate recognition of the spirit's experiences while asserting boundaries and guiding their energy toward release or containment. Her actions precise, measured, and deeply intentional, a culmination of years of expertise and intuitive understanding, while Steve monitored, recorded, and adjusted the perimeter in real time, ensuring safety and documenting every observable change, anomaly, and reaction. Over several hours, subtle but memorable shifts occurred. Oppressive air pressure diminished, shadows stabilized, water ripples aligned with gestures, and faint auditory phenomena became less intrusive, a clear sign that the intervention was effective, though Amy remained vigilant, aware that the presence was persistent, adaptive, and capable of resurgence, requiring continued observation, strategic engagement, and ongoing communication with the family to reinforce boundaries, awareness, and respect. As dusk approached, the swamp's natural rhythms reasserted themselves, birds and insects vocalizing once more, the mist thinning in a delicate balance, and Amy and Steve guided the family back to the cabin, reviewing events, reaffirming protective measures, and explaining the importance of ongoing vigilance. The family expressed relief tempered by a sober recognition that the Everglades were not merely a setting but an active participant in their lives, a landscape charged with history, memory, and sentience, demanding care, respect, and attentiveness in every interaction. Night fell with an almost theatrical intensity, the darkness punctuated by faint glimmers of fireflies, the distant call of owls, and the subtle rustle of leaves and water, and Amy, standing alone for a moment on the porch, reflected on the intricacy of the haunting, the intelligence, adaptability, and persistence of the presence, and the ongoing responsibility of those who would intervene. To balance respect with action, intuition with observation, and human will with acknowledgement of forces that had endured for generations, ensuring that their engagement would not only protect the family but also honor the layered histories embedded in this haunted, unforgiving, and beautiful swamp. The morning broke with a heavy, humid haze that clung to the cypress trees and blanketed the swamp in a ghostly veil, and as Amy Ellen stepped onto the porch of the cabin, she felt the familiar, subtle hum of the Everglades around her, a vibration in the air that seemed almost sentient, resonating with the layered history of the land, the countless tragedies and injustices that had occurred over decades, and the restless, often malevolent presences that had embedded themselves into the very soil and water, creating a living, breathing entity that was both ecosystem and spiritual domain. Steve Disciovi followed close behind, notebook open, recording minor changes in temperature, shifts in humidity, and the increasingly unusual behavior of birds, insects, and small mammals, each anomaly hinting at the swamp's awareness of their presence and the disturbances they were investigating. The family had gathered for breakfast, tentative and subdued, their expressions reflecting the mix of relief from previous interventions and the lingering tension that came from inhabiting a space charged with such complex energy. The children were quieter than usual, their eyes darting toward shadows and movement in the mist outside. A reminder that even the smallest changes in environment could trigger sensations of fear or alertness in those sensitive to unseen forces. Amy began the day by reviewing the previous sessions with Steve and the family, outlining the progress made, the remaining areas of concentrated energy, and the importance of careful observation, structured engagement, and deliberate ritual work, emphasizing that every action, however small, had the potential to influence the intricate network of spiritual and emotional energy that permeated the swamp, and that patience, respect, and precision were essential to maintaining safety while affecting meaningful change. They ventured back into the swamp later that morning, moving with caution, each step measured, each sound intentional, aware that the malevolent presence remained observant, testing boundaries, and that the complex lattice of residual energy extended far beyond the cabin and the well, weaving through the mangroves, shallow pools, and fallen trees in a pattern shaped by centuries of human and environmental interaction. Amy's senses were finely tuned, picking up subtle shifts in temperature, air pressure, and energy vibrations, tracing lines of influence and detecting points of concentrated activity that demanded attention. At a particularly dense section of the swamp, where mangrove roots tangled in intricate patterns and water stagnated beneath thick layers of fallen leaves, Amy detected a cluster of energy that radiated not only malevolence but also intense sorrow, a convergence of human tragedy that had occurred decades before and had left residual impressions on the environment itself, a spiritual echo that had gone unacknowledged for generations. She signaled Steve to set up documentation points while she approached the area, carefully scanning the ground, water, and foliage for both physical and energetic markers that could provide insight into the nature of the haunting. The family watched from a safe distance, their anxiety palpable, as Amy knelt near the roots of a particularly massive tree, sensing the layered presence of multiple spirits, some tethered by grief, others by anger, and one particularly potent, malevolent force tied to acts of violence and betrayal that had occurred on this very ground. She felt the energy pulse, a rhythmic beat that seemed almost communicative, a silent language of intent, warning, and observation that demanded careful interpretation. Steve, recording every observation, noted the subtle disturbances in water and vegetation, a small fish sleeping at an unnatural angle, a cluster of insects dispersing suddenly, and the faintest ripple across the surface of a stagnant pool where no wind or animal activity should have caused movement. Each anomaly was an indicator of the entity's responsiveness, a sign that the swamp itself had become an instrument of communication, amplifying and signaling the presence of consciousness beyond human understanding. Amy began the careful process of engagement, performing protective gestures and verbal acknowledgments, guiding the residual energies toward release or containment, and asserting boundaries in a way that respected the intelligence of the presence while prioritizing the safety of the living. Her movements were deliberate, her voice measured, a combination of spiritual practice and intuitive understanding, designed to stabilize the environment while simultaneously fostering a dialogue between the human and spiritual realms. The eldest daughter of the family, drawn by curiosity and an intuitive connection to the energy, mirrored Amy's gestures, her small hands moving tentatively but with surprising precision, and Amy noted how the child's presence amplified the effectiveness of the ritual, her sensitivity providing a natural conduit for communication, a reminder that the perceptions of those less encumbered by rational skepticism could reveal critical insights in complex hauntings. Hours passed as Amy methodically worked through the area, identifying notes of concentrated energy, tracing lines of influence, and noting subtle shifts in the swamp's responsiveness. Shadows moved in a pattern that seemed almost deliberate, the mist thickened and thinned in response to her gestures, and faint, ethereal sounds echoed from places beyond direct sight, hinting at layers of presence both residual and active. Steve continued documenting meticulously, observing how physical, emotional, and spiritual elements intertwined, capturing every anomalous movement, every shift in environmental conditions, and every reaction from both the family and Amy herself, understanding that this case, like no other, required a synthesis of observation, interpretation, and intervention, where human perception and intuition intersected with historical research, environmental study, and spiritual sensitivity. At one point, Amy sensed a malevolent force attempting to assert dominance, a subtle but unmistakable surge in energy that sought to intimidate and disrupt, a reminder that the entities involved were adaptive, aware, and capable of complex interactions. She responded with calm authority, reinforcing boundaries, directing energy toward resolution, and subtly communicating recognition of the presence's existence and intent without engaging in confrontation, maintaining a delicate balance between acknowledgement and control. As the afternoon waned, small victories became apparent, water ripples aligned with gestures, shadows receded from key areas, faint whispers diminished, and a general easing of tension spread through the clearing, signaling that the intervention was producing measurable, though provisional, effects. Amy emphasized to the family that the work was ongoing, that residual energies were persistent, and that continued observation, engagement, and respect were necessary to maintain stability and safety. Returning to the cabin, the group observed changes that reinforced the effectiveness of the interventions. Minor disturbances within the home decreased, objects that had shifted previously remained in place, and the general atmosphere, though still charged, felt less oppressive, a subtle but significant indication that their actions were producing real results, and that the swamp, while still sentient and vigilant, was responding to acknowledgement and careful mediation. That night, as darkness settled over the Everglades, the chorus of nocturnal creatures resumed, yet there was a noticeable difference in the cadence, a subtle harmony that suggested a recalibration of energy, a tentative equilibrium that had been established through ritual, observation, and respectful engagement. Amy stood on the porch, absorbing the layered sounds and movements, reflecting on the intricacy of the haunting, the intelligence and persistence of the malevolent presence, and the delicate balance that had to be maintained to ensure the family's safety while honoring the historical and spiritual narratives embedded in the swamp. Steve reviewed his notes, correlating observations with Amy's impressions, historical data, and environmental patterns, recognizing the unprecedented complexity of the case, where multiple layers of human emotion, environmental response, and spiritual persistence intersected to produce a dynamic, adaptive system that demanded both intellectual rigor and intuitive sensitivity. A fusion of analytical reasoning and experiential knowledge rarely required in tandem at such intensity. Meanwhile, the family settled into the cabin with cautious optimism, recognizing that while immediate threats had abated, the Everglades were an active participant in their lives, its memory, intelligence, and persistence a constant presence that would require ongoing respect, vigilance, and understanding. The children, once fearful, began to exhibit a tentative sense of agency, participating in small rituals, observing patterns, and recognizing that their actions could influence the energy around them, a critical component in stabilizing and reclaiming their home. Amy and Steve spent the rest of the evening planning their next phase, identifying key notes for further engagement, scheduling rituals and observation periods, and establishing protocols for monitoring and responding to energy fluctuations, fully aware that the swamp's intelligence was adaptive, capable of learning, and attentive to both human intention and error, and that their interventions required a blend of patience, strategy, and empathy to ensure sustainable resolution. As night deepened, the mist hung low over the swamp, water reflecting faint glimmers of moonlight, and Amy felt the persistent hum of energy surrounding the cabin, a reminder that while progress had been made, the Everglades' memory, sentience, and network of residual energy demanded ongoing respect, careful management, and unwavering attention. She knew that the next day would bring further challenges, subtle tests, and opportunities for understanding, and that the journey to reclaim the family's home, restore balance, and honor the layered histories of the swamp had only begun in earnest. Dawn arrived slowly over the Everglades, a pale, filtered light stretching across the swamp as mist hovered thick and low, and Amy Ellen stepped from the cabin with a sense of quiet determination, sensing immediately the layered energies around her, a delicate interplay of malevolence, grief, and residual attachment that had grown more pronounced over the previous days. Each new observation revealing complexity she had not anticipated, and every subtle vibration in the air, every whisper of movement among the mangroves, every reflective shimmer on the stagnant water serving as a reminder that the swamp was not simply a backdrop but an active participant in the haunting, responsive, aware, and adaptive to human presence. Steve Disciovi followed with meticulous caution, notebook open and pen poised, recording environmental anomalies, noting temperature shifts, variations in humidity, and the increasingly unusual behavior of birds, insects, and small mammals, each minor irregularity reinforcing the sense that the presence they were investigating was not only intelligent but observant, a persistent entity capable of influencing both perception and physical reality, adapting to interventions with subtle resistance or displacement that required ongoing vigilance and strategic action. The family gathered cautiously on the porch, their expressions a mixture of fatigue and wary curiosity, the children glancing repeatedly toward the dense mangroves and shadowed waterways as if expecting to see shapes materialize, aware that the past events and rituals had temporarily mitigated the oppressive energy, yet that the swamp's sentience remained, patient and watchful, a force that could neither be ignored nor underestimated, and that demanded respect, precision, and careful observation in all interactions. Amy reviewed the previous day's interventions, explaining to the family the importance of ongoing engagement with the nodes of residual energy, the mechanisms by which the malevolent presence exerted influence, and the necessity of intentional, respectful acknowledgement to reduce the intensity of the haunting, emphasizing that progress required consistent attention, accurate perception, and active participation, while Steve interwove historical context, connecting documented events of violence, disappearance, and betrayal to the locations of concentrated spiritual activity, demonstrating how patterns of human action had left long-lasting imprints on the land. By late morning, Amy led the group toward a section of the swamp deeper than they had previously ventured, an area dense with mangroves, fallen cypress trees, and stagnant pools, where her senses detected a particularly intense note of energy, a convergence of grief, rage, and residual fear that had accumulated over decades, a spiritual epicenter tied to multiple deaths and acts of violence, the echoes of which had persisted long after human memory had faded, leaving only the energy signature embedded in the environment. As they approached, subtle changes in the swamp became apparent. Water rippled without cause, shadows lengthened in impossible angles, and a faint, almost imperceptible whisper seemed to emanate from beneath the surface, layered with both urgency and defiance, signaling the presence's awareness of the investigator's approach and the potency of its concentration, a reminder that the Everglades were both observer and participant, testing boundaries while revealing its history true. Environmental cues and spiritual feedback. Amy directed the family to a perimeter of safety while she moved closer to the center of activity, sensing the individual threads of energy intertwined at the node, the anger of the malevolent man whose past actions had been violent and selfish, the sorrow of victims who had perished in unresolved circumstances, and the ongoing attachment of residual spirits whose energies had become entangled with both the environment and each other, creating a complex lattice that influenced perception, behavior, and physical phenomena. Steve set up observation points, carefully documenting water movement, air pressure, subtle vibrations, and changes in the behavior of nearby wildlife, while Amy began a carefully choreographed series of gestures and verbal acknowledgments designed to communicate recognition, establish protective boundaries, and guide trapped energies toward release or containment, her every movement deliberate. A combination of intuitive understanding and procedural expertise, meant to stabilize and harmonize the area, without provoking unnecessary conflict with the conscious entities present. The eldest daughter, drawn by curiosity and an intuitive sensitivity to the energy, mirrored Amy's movements under careful instruction, her gestures small but precise, contributing to the effectiveness of the ritual and providing a poignant example of how children's perceptions, unclouded by skepticism or rationalization, could facilitate communication and stabilization within complex hauntings, amplifying the effects of intentional acknowledgement and protective action. Hours passed as Amy worked through the area, engaging individual notes, tracing lines of influence, and noting subtle shifts in energy that suggested responsiveness from the spirits, from the malevolent presence, and from the environment itself, the swamp acting as both medium and amplifier, creating feedback loops that intertwine the human, spiritual, and environmental elements in ways that were complex, dynamic, and occasionally unpredictable. Steve meticulously documented these developments, cross-referencing environmental readings with Amy's impressions, the family's reactions, and the historical record, observing how temperature changes, water ripples, and vegetation movement corresponded to the focus of attention and ritualized action, confirming that the swamp and its spectral inhabitants were highly adaptive, capable of learning from engagement, and responsive to intentional human action executed with understanding and care. During this period, Amy sensed the malevolent presence testing her authority, pushing boundaries subtly, attempting to unsettle both her and the family, a display of intelligence and persistence that required measured response, protective gestures, verbal acknowledgments, and careful focus, reinforcing boundaries while communicating recognition and respect, maintaining equilibrium without escalation, a delicate balance of power, perception, and intention that demanded constant attention. By late afternoon, the interventions began to yield measurable effects. Oppressive sensations in the air lessened, shadows shifted to their natural patterns, ripples and movement in stagnant pools aligned with gestures rather than creating unpredictable disturbances, and faint whispers diminished in intensity, a clear indication that the energy was responding to acknowledgement, mediation, and structured engagement, though Amy remained vigilant, aware that persistence and adaptive intelligence could produce fluctuations requiring ongoing attention. Returning to the cabin, the family noted subtle changes. A previously rattling window stabilized, minor disturbances within the home decreased, and the general atmosphere felt less oppressive, a tangible, if temporary, manifestation of the swamp's recalibration in response to human intention and careful ritual action, reinforcing the importance of continued vigilance, observation, and respectful engagement. That evening, as night fell over the Everglades, Amy and Steve reviewed the day's findings, mapping notes of energy, noting environmental correlations, and planning the next phase of interventions, fully aware that the malevolent presence and the complex lattice of residual spirits would require strategic, ongoing action to maintain balance and ensure safety for the family, while simultaneously honoring the layered history embedded in the swamp and its consciousness. The family, while exhausted, participated in evening protective measures, reciting affirmations, observing subtle cues, and recognizing that their awareness, intention, and actions could influence the energy around them, reinforcing the lessons learned about respect, observation, and active participation in stabilizing a haunted environment, an understanding that would be critical in preventing resurgence or escalation of disruptive energy. As Amy stood alone on the porch later that night, the mist thickening and wrapping the swamp in a near impenetrable shroud, she reflected on the intricacy and persistence of the haunting, the interplay between human emotion, environmental responsiveness, and spiritual intelligence was profound, adaptive, and layered, requiring patience, skill, and empathy, and she knew that their interventions, while effective, were part of a long-term process, one in which observation, engagement, and acknowledgement would continue to play crucial roles, and that each day, each ritual, each protective measure contributed to the delicate balance that allowed both the living and the dead to coexist without harm. The Everglades, alive with centuries of memory, responded in subtle ways, distant water movement, occasional rustling of leaves, and the faint echoes of birds and insects carrying messages of the swamp's awareness, a living, sentient backdrop to a complex spiritual ecosystem, reminding Amy and Steve that their work extended beyond immediate intervention, encompassing understanding, patience, and ongoing negotiation with forces that had endured far longer than human lifespans and would continue to shape the landscape, perception, and lives of those who dwelled within it. Morning settled over the Everglades like a heavy, damp blanket, the sun struggling to pierce through thick layers of mist that clung to the cypress trees and the shallow, slow-moving waters, and Amy Ellen felt immediately the layered currents of energy surrounding the cabin, a dense network of unresolved grief, lingering malevolence, and the persistent presence of the violent man whose actions had long since ended in death but whose energy refused to dissipate, weaving itself into the very soil. The roots of the mangroves, and the stagnant pools of water that dominated the landscape, each step she took along the moss-laden path toward the swamp carried her deeper into the intricacies of the haunting, every movement of the water, every rustle of leaves, every sheaf of shadow serving as a signal that the Everglades were an active, sentient environment, aware of their intrusion and responsive in ways both subtle and insistent. Steve Disciovi followed with meticulous attention, notebook open, documenting environmental fluctuations, noting slight changes in temperature, air pressure, and the behavioral patterns of birds, reptiles, and insects, all of which seemed influenced by the presence they sought to understand, reinforcing the idea that the swamp's spiritual and natural elements were inextricably intertwined, a living matrix that required both observation and respect to navigate effectively. The family trailed cautiously behind, their apprehension tempered by a growing understanding of Amy's methodology, yet still keenly aware that the forces around them were unpredictable and potent, capable of provoking fear or danger at any moment. Amy led them to a part of the swamp deeper than they had previously explored, a labyrinth of mangrove roots, fallen trees, and stagnant pools where her senses detected a particularly intense concentration of energy, a convergence of sorrow, rage, and unresolved trauma that had persisted across generations, the imprint of multiple deaths, acts of cruelty, and neglect anchoring spirits to this physical and spiritual geography, creating a dense lattice of influence that radiated outward, affecting both the natural environment and the family's sense of safety. she instructed the family to maintain a perimeter at a safe distance while she moved closer, attuning herself to the subtle vibrations of the ground, the murmurs of water, and the faint sounds that seemed to emanate from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously, a chorus of residual energy that conveyed histories, warnings, and intentions beyond human comprehension, yet decipherable through careful observation and empathic resonance. The malevolent presence, sensing her approach, intensified its energy in a deliberate, testing manner, as though challenging her authority and focus, probing for vulnerability while simultaneously asserting its continued relevance. Steve observed from the edge, recording every nuance, the subtle, rhythmic undulations of water, the shifting shadows among the mangroves, the minute changes in temperature and humidity, and the reactions of the family, all of which corroborated Amy's impressions and provided a detailed account of the swamp's responsiveness to focus engagement, confirming the hypothesis that the haunting was a highly organized network of energy, informed by both human history and spiritual persistence. Adaptive to external input and capable of complex interaction. Amy knelt near a partially submerged root, sensing a knot of particularly dense energy, feeling the intertwining of rage, fear, and sorrow as though each emotion were a thread woven into a tapestry of unresolved existence, and began a deliberate series of acknowledgments and protective gestures, her voice low, steady, and articulate, invoking recognition, respect, and structured guidance for the spirits, offering release where possible while asserting boundaries that prevented escalation or harm to the living. The ritual, executed with precision, demanded focus, sensitivity, and continuous adjustment, responding to the nuanced feedback of energy, shadow, and subtle auditory cues. The eldest daughter, intrigued and intuitively sensitive to the ambient energy, mirrored Amy's gestures under careful supervision, her small movements surprisingly effective, her presence amplifying the protective framework of the ritual and providing a tangible example of how childlike perception, often unfiltered and direct, could strengthen interventions in a haunting, particularly one with multiple layers of emotional and malevolent complexity. Hours passed in the swamp as Amy systematically worked through the notes, tracing invisible lines of influence from the violent man to residual spirits of victims, observing how energy flowed, where resistance persisted, and where release or containment was most necessary. Subtle shifts in shadow, sound, and water movement indicated responsiveness, revealing that the presence was intelligent, adaptive, and capable of nuanced interaction, simultaneously testing, observing, and responding to human engagement. Steve documented every anomaly, correlating physical and environmental changes with Amy's impressions and the family's reactions, noting patterns in the malevolent presence's behavior, its methods of resistance, and the way environmental and spiritual elements converged to sustain its influence, constructing a multidimensional record that combined history, observation, and intuitive analysis, a synthesis necessary to comprehend the magnitude and intricacy of the haunting. At one point, Amy sensed a surge in intensity, a deliberate attempt by the malevolent presence to disrupt focus and intimidate, manifesting as a sudden ripple in stagnant water, an unnatural shadow along a mangrove trunk, and a whispering that seemed layered with both mockery and challenge. She responded calmly, reinforcing protective boundaries through gestures, verbal acknowledgement, and focused attention, maintaining equilibrium while asserting authority, a delicate balance that demonstrated both respect for the intelligence of the presence and a commitment to safety for the family. As afternoon waned, small yet significant changes became evident. The oppressive weight of the energy diminished slightly, the shadows aligned with natural patterns rather than erratic distortions, water ripples synchronized with Amy's gestures, and whispers became less intense, an indication that acknowledgement, mediation, and structured intervention could influence even the most persistent and adaptive energy, though vigilance remained essential to prevent resurgence. Returning to the cabin, the family noted subtle improvements. Minor disturbances in the home were reduced, objects remained in place, and the general atmosphere carried a tentative sense of ease, a reflection of the recalibration occurring both spiritually and environmentally, reinforcing the lessons of respect, attentiveness, and the power of deliberate action. Amy emphasized to them that while progress was apparent, the Everglades' intelligence, memory, and persistence required ongoing observation, engagement, and adherence to protective measures to maintain stability. That evening, the team reviewed findings, mapped notes of activity, and discussed strategies for the next phase, fully aware that the swamp's sentience was adaptive, the malevolent presence persistent, and the network of residual spirits complex and interwoven, demanding a fusion of historical understanding, empirical observation, and spiritual sensitivity. The family participated in evening protective rituals, reinforcing boundaries, reciting affirmations, and observing cues from both Amy and the environment, their active engagement contributing to stabilization while fostering a sense of agency, awareness, and empowerment. As darkness fell, the swamp's nocturnal chorus resumed, yet subtle differences in the pattern of sounds and movements suggested a recalibration, a tentative equilibrium, the product of careful engagement and acknowledgement, and Amy, standing alone on the cabin porch, reflected on the persistence, intelligence, and adaptability of the forces at play, recognizing that their work was far from complete, that the interplay between living and spectral, human and environmental, required continuous vigilance, empathy, and methodical intervention, and that every ritual, observation, and deliberate action contributed to the delicate balance necessary for coexistence, safety, and resolution in this haunted, sentient landscape. The morning mist lay thick over the Everglades, draping the swamp in a silvery veil that muffled sound and distorted perception, and Amy Ellen stepped carefully along the mossy path, attuned immediately to the layers of energy that pulsed invisibly through the water, roots, and air, a dense interplay of malevolence, grief, and lingering attachment that had accumulated over decades, each residue of pain and rage leaving an imprint on the landscape, creating a complex lattice of spiritual tension that influenced the environment and human perception alike. Steve Disciovi followed behind, pen poised and eyes scanning, meticulously recording temperature variations, minor shifts in humidity, water movement, and the behavior of wildlife, noting the subtle anomalies that often preceded visible manifestations of the haunting, understanding that these small details were crucial indicators of intelligence and responsiveness within the residual energy. The family moved cautiously behind them, a mix of apprehension and tentative confidence guiding their steps, acutely aware that the swamp was not merely a passive backdrop but an active, sentient participant in the haunting, capable of reacting to human presence, intention, and intervention in unpredictable ways. Their nervous glances toward shadows and water revealing both fear and growing awareness of the layers of activity around them. Amy led them to a secluded section of the swamp, deeper and more labyrinthine than previously explored, where mangrove roots tangled in intricate patterns and stagnant pools reflected ghostly distortions of the sky, a place she had sensed in her earlier investigations as a particularly dense node of energy, a convergence of sorrow, rage, and unresolved trauma anchored in both historical and spiritual events, the imprint of multiple deaths, betrayals, and acts of cruelty layering upon one another to form a focal point of intense residual energy that radiated outward, influencing the swamp and the cabin for hundreds of yards. She instructed the family to maintain a safe perimeter as she approached the center of activity, her body attuned to the faint vibrations in the ground, the subtle shifts in mist, and the whispered currents of energy that seemed to emanate from every direction, a chorus of unresolved intentions and emotions that communicated not in words but through sensation, pattern, and subtle environmental manipulation, conveying history, warning, and awareness in a language only perceptible to those willing and able to feel it. Steve carefully observed from the edge, recording every ripple in the water, each change in shadow, and every unusual movement of flora and fauna, correlating these physical cues with Amy's descriptions and the family's reactions, noting that the malevolent presence was responsive, adaptive, and capable of deliberate interaction with both the environment and the investigators, reinforcing the idea that the haunting was not random but a complex network of conscious and residual energies, requiring strategic, deliberate engagement. Amy knelt beside a partially submerged root, feeling the concentrated pulse of energy, the intertwining threads of rage, grief, and persistent attachment palpable as though each emotion were a tangible presence in space, layered upon one another to form a lattice of unresolved history. She began a carefully measured ritual of acknowledgement, protective gestures, and verbal communication, designed to recognize the spirit's experiences while guiding their energies toward release or containment. Maintaining safety for the living while respecting the intelligence and persistence of the entities present, each movement deliberate, every phrase weighted with intention and respect. The eldest daughter, drawn by instinct and intuition, mirrored Amy's gestures cautiously, her small hands moving in synchrony, amplifying the ritual's effectiveness and providing a vital conduit of sensitivity, a reminder that children often perceive subtleties in energy and intention that adults might overlook. Their unfiltered awareness creating a bridge for communication and stabilization within complex hauntings, particularly those with multiple intertwined presences. Hours pass as Amy engaged each node of energy, tracing invisible lines connecting the malevolent presence to the residual spirits of victims, observing the flow, resistance, and response of each energy cluster, while Steve meticulously documented environmental and behavioral anomalies, mapping correlations and constructing a multidimensional record that merged historical research, observation, and intuitive perception, providing both explanation and actionable data for ongoing intervention. During one particularly tense moment, Amy felt a surge of energy, an attempt by the malevolent presence to assert dominance, to test focus and destabilize the ritual, manifesting as a sudden ripple in stagnant water, a shadow that stretched unnaturally along a mangrove trunk, and a whisper layered with challenge, anger, and mockery, an unmistakable signal of intelligence and persistence that required calm, authoritative response. Amy reinforced boundaries, reaffirmed protective gestures, and maintained focus, asserting control without confrontation, a delicate balance of respect, authority, and safety that demanded constant attention and adjustment. As the afternoon waned, memorable shifts became apparent, oppressive sensations lifted slightly, shadows aligned with natural patterns, ripples in the pools responded predictably to gestures, and whispered sounds diminished in intensity, indicating that the layered energies were responsive to acknowledgement, structured engagement, and careful intervention, though Amy remained vigilant, aware that the adaptive intelligence of the malevolent presence could fluctuate and that persistence required continued observation and mediation. Returning to the cabin, the family noticed subtle but meaningful improvements. Previously rattling windows stabilized, minor disturbances within the home decreased, and the atmosphere carried a tentative sense of ease, reflecting the swamp's recalibration in response to human intention and respectful engagement. Amy emphasized the importance of continued vigilance, noting that the Everglades' sentience and memory were persistent, capable of adaptation, and required ongoing observation, engagement, and protective measures to maintain stability and prevent resurgence. That evening, Amy and Steve reviewed their findings, mapping notes, correlating historical events with observed energy patterns, and developing strategies for subsequent interventions, fully aware of the swamp's adaptability and the persistent intelligence of the malevolent presence, a network of energy woven through generations of human action and environmental response, dynamic, resilient, and intricate. The family participated in protective rituals, reinforcing boundaries, observing subtle cues, and engaging with intention, their involvement fostering a sense of agency and empowerment while simultaneously stabilizing the environment, demonstrating the critical role of human perception and action in maintaining equilibrium in a haunted space, and highlighting the interdependence of living participants and sentient energy networks within the Everglades. As night settled, the swamp's nocturnal chorus resumed, yet differences in the cadence and pattern of sounds suggested a recalibration, a fragile equilibrium achieved through deliberate, respectful engagement, and Amy, standing alone on the porch, absorbed the layered sounds and shadows, reflecting on the intelligence, persistence, and adaptability of the forces at play, recognizing that their work was ongoing, that observation, ritual, and deliberate action remain essential, and that each engagement contributed to the delicate balance necessary for coexistence, safety, and resolution in a landscape charged with memory, energy, and sentience, a haunted environment both beautiful and unforgiving. The morning air hung heavy over the Everglades, a dense mist curling around cypress trunks and draping over stagnant pools, and Amy Allen stepped from the cabin into the subtle, layered vibrations of the swamp, sensing immediately the confluence of residual energy, grief, and malevolence that had intensified over the preceding days, each layer of disturbance bound tightly to the land itself, the mangrove roots, fallen cypress trees, and waterlogged soil acting as conduits for the spirits. Memories and unresolved intentions, creating a network of influence that radiated through the swamp and into the family's home. Steve Disciovi followed, notebook in hand, documenting fluctuations in temperature, humidity, water movement, and the behaviors of animals that seemed to respond directly to the ambient energy, confirming patterns of intelligence and responsiveness within the residual and active presences, demonstrating the swamp's dynamic interaction with human and spiritual participants alike. The family trailed cautiously, a mixture of apprehension, fatigue, and tentative confidence guiding their movements, their senses attuned to shifts in shadow, subtle sounds in the mist, and the movement of water, aware that the swamp was both sentient and responsive, capable of observing, testing, and adapting to human behavior, and that their presence alone could provoke energy fluctuations, a fact that demanded respect, attentiveness, and deliberate action at every turn. Amy led them to a particularly isolated section of the swamp, farther into the mangrove maze than they had previously ventured, a place dense with twisted roots, fallen trunks, and shallow, stagnant pools, where she sensed the convergence of multiple layers of unresolved energy, the malevolent presence of the violent men, the sorrow and fear of victims long gone, and residual emotional imprints of those who had witnessed or been tangentially involved in the historical tragedies. These forces had fused into a concentrated node of energy radiating outward, influencing the environment, the cabin, and anyone who dared enter this labyrinthine area. She instructed the family to establish a secure perimeter as she approached, attuning her senses to imperceptible vibrations in the water and soil, subtle shifts in shadows, and the quiet whispers that seemed to emanate from nowhere yet carried weight and intent, conveying histories, warnings, and awareness that could only be interpreted through intuition, empathy, and careful observation. The malevolent presence immediately registered her approach, intensifying its energy in a deliberate, testing manner, as though gauging her authority and resolve. Steve observed from the edge, capturing environmental anomalies and correlating them with Amy's impressions and the family's reactions, noting how the swamp's energy shifted in real time in response to gestures, voice, and ritualized actions, confirming the presence's adaptive intelligence and its ability to manipulate perception, sound, and movement within its domain, reinforcing the necessity for precise, controlled engagement with both physical and spiritual elements. Amy knelt near a thick root partially submerged in water, sensing the interwoven strands of rage, sorrow, and attachment as tangible presences, each one layered upon the other to create a complex lattice of unresolved history, and she began a series of deliberate protective gestures, verbal acknowledgments, and guided intentions, recognizing the spirit's experiences while asserting boundaries and directing their energies towards stabilization, containment, or release. Her every movement was precise, every phrase carefully weighted with intention, the culmination of years of experience in navigating highly complex hauntings where multiple entities, environmental responsiveness, and human perception intersected. The eldest daughter, sensitive to energy and naturally intuitive, mirrored Amy's movements cautiously under guidance, amplifying the ritual's effectiveness and demonstrating how unfiltered. Perception in children can provide critical support in stabilizing complex hauntings, allowing communication between layers of energy that might otherwise remain unaddressed or disruptive. Hours pass as Amy traced notes of influence, noting how the malevolent presence interacted with residual spirits, observing subtle patterns of resistance and compliance, while Steve meticulously documented every anomaly, mapping correlations between environmental conditions, Amy's perceptions, and the family's responses, constructing a multidimensional record that combined historical research, observation, and intuitive understanding, creating a comprehensive framework for intervention and ongoing monitoring. Mid-afternoon brought a pronounced surge in energy, a deliberate attempt by the malevolent presence to assert dominance, manifesting as ripples in the water, elongated shadows among the mangroves, and whispers layered with challenge, mockery, and latent threat, signaling both intelligence and persistence, and requiring Amy to maintain calm, focused authority, reinforcing protective boundaries and continuing the ritualized engagement without provoking escalation, a delicate balance between acknowledgement, control, and respect. By late afternoon, measurable shifts indicated progress, oppressive sensations in the air eased, shadows returned to natural alignment, ripples in stagnant pools synchronized with Amy's gestures, and the intensity of whispered sounds diminished, demonstrating that acknowledgement, structured engagement, and deliberate action could influence even persistent, adaptive energy, though vigilance remained critical to prevent resurgence or displacement of energy to other parts of the swamp. Returning to the cabin, the family observed subtle but significant improvements. Rattling windows had stabilized, minor disturbances inside the home had lessened, and the general atmosphere carried a tentative sense of ease, a manifestation of the recalibration that had occurred both spiritually and environmentally, reinforcing the importance of continued attentiveness, protective measures, and responsible engagement with a sentient, reactive environment. That evening, Amy and Steve reviewed their notes, cross-referencing environmental anomalies with historical events, previous interventions, and observed responses, preparing strategies for further engagement, fully aware of the swamp's adaptability and the persistence of the malevolent presence, recognizing that the network of residual energy was interwoven, dynamic, and capable of both subtle resistance and overt manifestation, requiring continued precision, empathy, and methodical action. The family participated in protective rituals, reaffirming boundaries, observing subtle cues, and actively engaging in actions that fostered agency and empowerment while stabilizing the environment, highlighting the critical role of human intention and awareness in maintaining balance within a haunted space, and emphasizing the interdependence of living participants and sentient energy networks in achieving temporary equilibrium. As night fell, the nocturnal chorus of the swamp resumed, yet with discernible differences in rhythm and pattern, indicating recalibration, tentative equilibrium, and the ongoing effects of deliberate, respectful intervention, and Amy, standing alone on the cabin porch, absorbed the layered sounds and subtle movements of the Everglades, reflecting on the persistence, adaptability, and intelligence of the forces at play, understanding that their work remained unfinished, that observation, ritual, and careful, deliberate action would continue to be essential, and that each engagement contributed to the fragile balance necessary for coexistence, safety, and eventual resolution in a landscape charged with memory, energy, and sentience, a haunted environment both beautiful and unforgiving. The swamp was thick with mist as morning spread across the Everglades, filtering the sunlight into a pale, ghostly glow that seemed to hang in the air, and Amy Ellen moved carefully along the waterlogged path, her senses finely attuned to the subtle vibrations of the land, the faint whispers of energy that lingered in the air, and the invisible threads of emotion and memory embedded in the swamp, a complex lattice of grief, rage, and unresolved trauma that had persisted for decades, binding both spirits and physical space in a living, sentient network. Steve Disciovi followed, notebook open, meticulously noting minor temperature fluctuations, humidity shifts, irregular patterns of wildlife behavior, and subtle disturbances in water and vegetation, each anomaly a confirmation of the swamp's adaptive intelligence and its responsiveness to both human and spiritual presence, providing tangible data that complemented Amy's intuitive perceptions. The family moved cautiously behind them, a mixture of apprehension, curiosity, and tentative confidence guiding their steps, aware that the swamp was not merely a setting but a sentient participant in the haunting, capable of observing, testing, and adapting to their presence, and that each action, each gesture, each thought could influence the outcome, for better or worse, of their engagement with the persistent malevolent force that had haunted the property and its surroundings for generations. Amy led them to a secluded area deep within the mangrove labyrinth, a section she had identified as a nexus of concentrated energy, where the residual trauma of violent acts, deaths, and betrayals had merged with the malevolent presence to create a potent, reactive node, radiating influence outward and affecting both environmental patterns and human perception in subtle but undeniable ways. This place, dense with twisted roots, fallen trees, and stagnant pools, felt heavier, more charged, and far more alert to their presence than any other part of the swamp they had previously explored. She instructed the family to remain at a safe perimeter while she approached the core of activity, attuning herself to the vibrations of the earth, the movement of water, the shifting mist, and the faint, layered whispers that seemed to emanate from everywhere at once, a chorus of past intentions, present awareness, and unresolved energy that demanded careful interpretation, empathy, and methodical response. The malevolent presence, recognizing her approach, intensified its influence, sending subtle waves of resistance through the environment, testing her focus, measuring her authority, and attempting to assert control over the interactions taking place. Steve observed from a distance, recording every environmental anomaly, correlating water ripples, shadow shifts, and animal reactions with Amy's movements and the family's responses, carefully documenting patterns of resistance, adaptation, and compliance within the energy network, understanding that the haunting was not random but highly organized and responsive, a complex ecosystem of intelligence, memory, and emotion interacting with both living participants and the physical environment. Amy knelt beside a cluster of gnarled roots partially submerged in water, sensing the interwoven strands of rage, sorrow, and attachment that coalesced into a dense node of energy, each emotion layered upon the other to create a multidimensional presence that demanded precise acknowledgement, protective measures, and intentional engagement, and she began a carefully choreographed series of gestures and verbalizations designed to recognize the spirit's experiences, establish boundaries, and guide their energies toward release or containment, her every action deliberate, measured, and weighted with years of experience in navigating highly complex hauntings. The eldest daughter, her intuition and sensitivity to the energy palpable, mirrored Amy's gestures cautiously, amplifying the ritual's effectiveness and providing a crucial conduit for interaction. Demonstrating how children, unencumbered by skepticism or overanalysis, could serve as bridges in situations where human and spiritual communication intersected, stabilizing the energy while enhancing the responsiveness of residual presences. Hours passed as Amy engaged the nodes, tracing invisible lines of influence from the violent man's energy to residual spirits, observing where resistance persisted and where compliance or release was achievable, while Steve meticulously recorded observations, mapping correlations between environmental anomalies, Amy's impressions, and the family's responses, creating a multi-layered account of the haunting that integrated history, observation, and intuitive insight, providing a comprehensive framework for ongoing intervention and monitoring. Mid-afternoon brought an intensified surge of energy, a deliberate attempt by the malevolent presence to test focus and authority, manifesting as water ripples in stagnant pools, shadows stretching unnaturally along the mangrove trunks, and layered whispers that conveyed challenge, mockery, and latent threat, signaling the intelligence, persistence, and adaptability of the entity. Amy responded with calm authority, reinforcing boundaries through gestures, verbal acknowledgement, and deliberate attention, maintaining equilibrium while asserting control without provoking escalation, balancing respect, strategy, and protection. As the afternoon progressed, memorable shifts became evident, oppressive sensations in the air lessened, shadows realigned with natural forms, ripples in water pools responded predictably to Amy's gestures, and whispers diminished in intensity, indicating that acknowledgement, structured engagement, and careful intervention could influence even persistent, adaptive energies, though vigilance remained essential to prevent resurgence or energy displacement to other areas of the swamp. Returning to the cabin, the family observed subtle improvements. Previously rattling windows remained steady, minor disturbances in the home decreased, and the overall atmosphere carried a sense of tentative relief, a tangible reflection of recalibration occurring spiritually and environmentally, reinforcing lessons about attentiveness, respect, and deliberate intervention. Amy emphasized that although progress was visible, the Everglades' sentience and memory were persistent, requiring ongoing engagement, observation, and protective rituals to maintain stability. That evening, Amy and Steve reviewed their findings, correlating environmental changes with historical events, previous interventions, and observed responses, developing strategies for the next phase of engagement, fully aware that the swamp's intelligence was adaptive and the malevolent presence persistent, forming a network of energy that was dynamic, intricate, and capable of both subtle resistance and overt influence, requiring precise, empathetic, and methodical action. The family participated in protective rituals, reaffirming boundaries, observing cues, and actively engaging in behaviors that fostered agency and stabilization, emphasizing the critical role of human perception and action in maintaining equilibrium, and demonstrating the interdependence of living participants and sentient energy networks in the ongoing process of achieving balance. As darkness fell over the Everglades, the swamp's nocturnal chorus resumed, yet subtle differences in rhythm and pattern suggested recalibration, a tentative equilibrium established through careful and respectful intervention, and Amy, standing alone on the cabin porch, absorbed the layered sounds, shadows, and subtle movements of the landscape, reflecting on the persistence, adaptability, and intelligence of the forces at play, understanding that the work remained unfinished, that continued observation, ritual, and deliberate action would be necessary, and that each engagement contributed to the fragile, ongoing balance required for coexistence, safety, and eventual resolution in a landscape alive with memory, energy, and sentience, a haunted environment both beautiful and unforgiving. The dawn mist clung heavily to the Everglades, curling around cypress trees and mangrove roots, creating an ethereal curtain that distorted sight and softened sound, and Amy Ellen stepped cautiously along the swamp path, her senses immediately alert to the intricate layers of energy surrounding the cabin and beyond, a complex lattice of residual grief, lingering malevolence, and unresolved trauma that had persisted over decades, each imprint woven into the soil, water, and twisted roots, creating a living, sentient environment where history, memory, and emotion converge in patterns perceptible only through careful observation, intuition, and deep attunement. Steve Disciovi followed closely, pen poised, documenting environmental fluctuations, subtle disturbances in water and vegetation, and the anomalous behavior of birds, insects, and reptiles, each deviation reinforcing the understanding that the swamp itself was an active participant in the haunting, adaptive and responsive to human presence, intention, and ritual intervention. The family trailed behind, a mixture of apprehension, fatigue, and tentative confidence guiding their movements, aware that the swamp was not simply a backdrop but a sentient entity capable of observing, testing, and reacting to their presence, and that every action, gesture, or thought could influence the outcomes of their engagement with the persistent malevolent force that had haunted the property for generations, a force that remained adaptive, intelligent, and determined. Amy led them to a secluded, more labyrinthine section of the swamp, deeper than previously explored, where the mangrove roots intertwined with fallen cypress trunks and stagnant pools, and she felt the concentrated convergence of multiple layers of residual energy, the malevolent force, the sorrow and fear of victims, and the imprints of those tangentially involved in past tragedies, all merged into a potent note radiating influence outward, affecting both the environment and the cabin for considerable distance. She instructed the family to maintain a safe perimeter as she approached the center, attuning herself to subtle vibrations in the ground and water, the shifting patterns of mist, and faint, layered whispers emanating from the space around her, a chorus of past intentions and present awareness that communicated in sensation and pattern rather than words, demanding precise interpretation and careful response. The malevolent presence recognized her proximity immediately, intensifying its energy. Testing her focus, measuring her authority, and asserting influence in subtle, deliberate ways. Steve remained vigilant at the edge, recording anomalies and correlating them with Amy's observations and the family's reactions, noting how shifts in shadows, water, and wildlife behaviors corresponded with gestures, vocalizations, and ritualized actions, confirming that the haunting was not random but a highly organized, responsive network of energy, capable of learning from and reacting to human intervention, requiring methodical, informed, and deliberate engagement to achieve stabilization. Amy knelt beside a massive mangrove root partially submerged in water, feeling the dense interweaving of anger, sorrow, and attachment, each emotion tangible, layered, and distinct, forming a multidimensional node of unresolved history, and she began a carefully structured series of protective gestures, verbal acknowledgments, and focused intent, designed to recognize the spirit's experiences, establish boundaries, and guide energy toward containment or release, her every motion precise, measured, and informed by years of experience handling complex, multi-layered hauntings. The eldest daughter, intuitive and highly sensitive to subtle energies, mirrored Amy's movements cautiously under guidance, amplifying the ritual's effectiveness and providing a critical channel for interaction, demonstrating how unfiltered perception, especially in children, can serve as a stabilizing force and bridge in situations where energy, emotion, and consciousness intersect, facilitating communication and balance among multiple presences. Hours passed as Amy traced lines of influence connecting the malevolent force to residual spirits, observing where resistance persisted, where compliance was achievable, and where energy required careful mediation. Steve meticulously documented environmental responses, correlating them with historical records, Amy's perceptions, and the family's reactions, producing a comprehensive, multidimensional record of the haunting that integrated observation, history, and intuitive understanding, forming the basis for ongoing strategic intervention. Mid-afternoon brought a deliberate surge of resistance from the malevolent presence, manifesting as sudden ripples in stagnant pools, unnatural elongation of shadows along mangrove trunks, and whispers layered with mockery and latent threat, signaling intelligence, persistence, and adaptive response. Amy maintained calm authority, reinforcing protective boundaries and continuing her ritualized engagement with focus and precision, a delicate balance of respect, control, and safety necessary to prevent escalation while asserting effective intervention. As the afternoon waned, noticeable shifts indicated progress, oppressive sensations lifted, shadows aligned naturally, water ripples responded predictably to gestures, and whispered sounds decreased, demonstrating that structured acknowledgement and engagement could influence even the most persistent, adaptive energy, though constant vigilance was essential to prevent resurgence or displacement to adjacent areas. Returning to the cabin, the family noted subtle yet significant improvements. Windows previously rattling now remained stable, minor disturbances in the home decreased, and the atmosphere carried a tentative sense of relief, a tangible reflection of spiritual and environmental recalibration, reinforcing lessons about respect, attentiveness, and deliberate intervention. Amy reminded them that while progress was evident, the swamp's sentience, memory, and adaptability required continued engagement, observation, and protective rituals to maintain stability. That evening, Amy and Steve reviewed notes, mapping notes of activity, correlating environmental anomalies with historical context and previous interventions, and developing strategies for the next phase of engagement, fully aware that the swamp's intelligence was adaptive and the malevolent presence persistent, forming a dynamic network of energy interwoven with residual spirits, capable of subtle resistance and overt manifestation, demanding continued precision, empathy, and methodical action. The family participated in protective rituals, reaffirming boundaries, observing subtle cues, and actively engaging in practices that fostered agency and stabilization, emphasizing the critical role of human intention in maintaining equilibrium within a haunted space, demonstrating the interdependence of living participants and sentient energy networks. As night fell, the nocturnal chorus resumed, yet the rhythm carried subtle differences in pitch and timing, indicative of recalibration, a fragile equilibrium achieved through deliberate and respectful engagement. Amy, standing alone on the cabin porch, absorbed the layered sounds, shadows, and subtle movements of the Everglades, reflecting on the persistence, intelligence, and adaptability of the forces at play, aware that their work remained ongoing, that continued observation, ritual, and deliberate action would be necessary, and that each engagement contributed to the fragile, ongoing balance required for coexistence, safety, and eventual resolution in this haunted, sentient landscape, both beautiful and unforgiving. The swamp lay shrouded in the pale, ghostly light of dawn, mist curling through mangrove roots and draping over stagnant pools, and Amy Ellen stepped carefully along the waterlogged path, immediately attuned to the intricate layers of energy that had grown denser over the course of their investigation, a multifaceted network of grief, rage, attachment, and unresolved trauma that had persisted for decades, embedded in the roots, water, soil, and atmosphere, a living, sentient system that responded to human perception and intervention with subtle, intelligent feedback. Steve Disciovi followed closely, pen poised, meticulously recording environmental changes, unusual animal behavior, subtle water movements, and variations in shadows, each anomaly confirming that the swamp itself was an active participant in the haunting, adaptive and responsive, capable of communicating through both physical and spiritual channels, and demanding precise, informed, and respectful engagement. The family moved cautiously behind them, balancing fear and cautious confidence, aware that the Everglades were not a passive setting but a sentient participant, and that each step, gesture, or thought could influence the outcome of the haunting, for better or worse, requiring continuous vigilance, attentiveness, and disciplined action to avoid provoking the malevolent energy that had persisted for generations. Amy guided them to a secluded, more labyrinthine section of the swamp, deeper than any previously explored, where fallen cypress trunks, twisted mangrove roots, and shallow, stagnant pools created a natural lattice of dense energy, a focal point where multiple layers of residual and malevolent presence converged, radiating influence outward and affecting both the environment and the cabin, anchoring emotions, memories, and unresolved intentions into a complex network that pulsed with sentient awareness. She instructed the family to maintain a secure perimeter while she approached the core, attuning herself to subtle vibrations, changes in water, shifts in shadows, and the layered, almost imperceptible whispers that emanated from the swamp, a chorus of intention, memory, and awareness that could only be interpreted through empathy, focus, and careful observation. The malevolent presence immediately sensed her proximity, intensifying energy in a deliberate, testing manner, assessing her authority and the effectiveness of the ritual intervention. Steve observed carefully from the perimeter, documenting the interplay between environmental cues, Amy's gestures, and the family's responses, noting how water ripples, shadows, and wildlife behavior corresponded with the unfolding ritual, reinforcing the understanding that this was a highly organized and intelligent system of energy, capable of learning, adapting, and responding to human intervention, and that precise, respectful action could influence outcomes even within such a persistent, layered haunting. Amy knelt beside a partially submerged root, feeling the dense interweaving of grief, rage, and attachment, each emotion tangible, layered, and multidimensional, and she began a sequence of carefully structured protective gestures, verbal acknowledgement, and guided intention, designed to recognize the spirit's experiences, establish clear boundaries, and facilitate the release or containment of energy. Her movements deliberate, precise, and informed by years of experience with multi-layered hauntings where human, environmental, and spiritual elements intersect. The eldest daughter, sensitive and intuitive, mirrored Amy's gestures cautiously, amplifying the ritual's effectiveness, demonstrating how unfiltered, childlike perception can serve as a stabilizing bridge within complex hauntings, strengthening communication and harmony among multiple presences. Hours passed as Amy traced lines of influence, observing the interactions between the malevolent force and residual spirits, noting patterns of resistance, compliance, and responsiveness, while Steve meticulously documented each anomaly, environmental shift, and subtle reaction, creating a comprehensive record that synthesized history, observation, and intuitive insight, a guide for continued intervention and long-term monitoring. Mid-afternoon brought an intense surge from the malevolent presence, manifesting as ripples in stagnant pools, unnaturally elongated shadows, and layered whispers conveying defiance, mockery, and latent threat, signaling intelligence, persistence, and adaptability. Amy maintained calm, authoritative focus, reinforcing protective boundaries, and continuing her ritualized engagement without provoking escalation, balancing respect, safety, and strategic intervention. Gradually, measurable shifts indicated progress. Oppressive energy diminished, shadows returned to natural alignment, water responded predictably to gestures, and whispers weakened, showing that deliberate acknowledgement and structured intervention could influence even adaptive, persistent energy, though vigilance remained essential to prevent resurgence or displacement to other parts of the swamp. Returning to the cabin, the family noticed tangible improvements. Windows remained stable, minor disturbances decreased, and the atmosphere carried a tentative sense of ease, a reflection of spiritual and environmental recalibration achieved through careful, respectful intervention. Amy reminded them that the Everglades' sentience, memory, and intelligence demanded ongoing observation, engagement, and protective practices to sustain stability. That evening, Amy and Steve reviewed their findings, correlating historical context with environmental anomalies and previous interventions, developing strategies for continued engagement, fully aware that the malevolent presence remained adaptive and persistent, entwined with residual energy that formed a dynamic, responsive network, capable of both subtle resistance and overt influence, requiring precision, empathy, and methodical attention. The family participated in protective rituals, reaffirming boundaries, observing environmental and spiritual cues, and engaging in actions that reinforce agency and stabilization, illustrating the critical role of human perception and intervention in maintaining balance within a haunted environment, and emphasizing the interdependence of living participants and sentient energy networks. As darkness fell, the swamp's nocturnal chorus resumed, yet subtle differences in rhythm, pitch, and timing suggested recalibration, a tentative equilibrium established through careful, respectful engagement. Amy, standing alone on the porch, absorbed the layered sounds, movements, and shadows of the Everglades, reflecting on the persistence, adaptability, and intelligence of the forces at play, understanding that while significant progress had been made, the work of observation, ritual, and deliberate action was ongoing, each engagement contributing to the delicate, enduring balance necessary for coexistence, safety, and eventual resolution in a landscape alive with memory, energy, and sentience, a haunted environment both beautiful and unforgiving, where history and spirits intertwined, leaving indelible marks upon the land and all who dared to confront it. And Amy, feeling the weight and the wonder of it all, knew that the Everglades had revealed some of its deepest truths, yet always held more beneath the mist, waiting for those willing to listen, respect, and act with care.